All right. Welcome to the Heavy Gear Cast, a podcast dedicated to your heavy gear needs. My name is D-Ron, and today I am joined by our co-host, Gene. How are you doing today, Gene?
Another beautiful day, sir.
Awesome. And what hobby progress are you working on today?
Today we'll be working on some CEF HPCs.
Oh, cool.
Need
What
to
are
do
the
that.
HPCs in CEF?
They're the hover personnel carriers.
Oh, cool. And they just transferred the infantry around and all of that?
Yep. If you need some way to get your grells moving faster, they're your ticket.
Sweet. And today we are also joined by our special guest, Colin. How are you doing today, Colin?
Hi, I'm doing pretty good today. It's a nice mild day out there, and I'm happy to be here and talking with you.
Awesome.
And glad to have you, Colin.
I'm happy to be here.
And as you guys can see from the title, today we're going to be talking about the North. And Colin is the expert on the lore, especially for the North. And I would say all the factions, Colin.
Well, I've been doing heavy gear for quite some time, so the North is definitely one of my. I know the North better than most of the factions, but yeah, I'm pretty good with most of them.
Yeah, and I guess we can get started on about you. If you want to tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into Heavy Gear Blitz and what's your main factions you play and all of that.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, I started way back in the second edition of the old tactical role-playing game. And that's where I had most of my gameplay. I ran a lot of demo games. I brought a lot of people into the hobby. And I've been basically playing ever since, both the tactical and the role-playing game. I ran a Black Talons campaign for many years and been all across the Gateweb, ran into pretty much every faction. I collect North and Utopia. And yeah, I've been playing every edition, and I don't know how much of my design went into the current design for the Utopians, but I do know that I'm the one that provided the physical and stat design for the Marduk and some of the other Utopian stuff. And I provide a bunch of other stuff with that. So yeah, I've been involved, you could say.
Dang, that's pretty cool. Especially to be a part of the development of a faction. I think that's pretty awesome. And how are you liking the 3.0 roles right now?
I wish I had the ability to say, but I haven't had a lot of chance to play games given the current disaster of being able to actually get games in right now. So I like the direction that a lot of the rules are trending towards. I especially like the diversification in electronic warfare and things like that. I'm looking forward to being able to get some solid games so I can get a good opinion of what the current rule set is. So things are looking up. I'm okay with it.
And quick follow-up. How do you feel about the HP or Heavy Gear role-playing game coming back into production?
I'm very happy to learn that the role-playing game is looking to come back in production. You've said a lot of words that I really like when you've been talking about what you're developing with it, especially a life path system to develop characters that fit better into the world, and a little bit more focus on the types of characters and things like that. I'm very interested in what you guys are building, and I have a lot of hope, and I see a lot of improvements over the old system. I love the old system, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely a product of its time. So, yeah, thumbs up.
And
awesome.
Hopefully it does become really awesome and well received.
One of the things that I really encourage you to do when it comes to the role-playing game, play test, and don't get married to any design concepts. Don't get married to any of them. Be prepared to throw stuff out.
Sure.
But you know what you're doing.
Yeah, I assume they're constantly changing the RPG a lot. That's what I hear a lot from. I think it's Prof on the Discord. he's been talking about a lot of switching around, because I know the 3.0 rules doesn't go through that many changes. It's probably about every 3 to 6 months from what the last update.
Yeah.
And I feel like the RPG has been going through a lot of changes. Have you actually got to check out the rules and just do you like it so far?
The rule set, the actual dice mechanic, the core system feels a little overworked. It feels like there's too much going on in there, in my opinion. The reason why it was called the silhouette system at first was because the rule system was supposed to be transparent. It didn't quite achieve that all the time. Sometimes it could get a little complicated. But in general, it accomplished what it wanted. It was transparent. You didn't have to think about the rules. They just happened. Whereas this one, it seems like actually resolving a dice roll and things like that might be a little bit more work. But again, playtesting, this is all, the proof is in the pudding, not in my opinions, just looking at it.
Yeah, and I think it's a perfect time, especially with everyone staying at home currently. It's a good time to just practice the rules and all that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just like I asked Gene on the first episode, what is your favorite heavy gear model and why?
My favorite heavy gear model? Oh, that's a really good question. That I was not expecting. For sentimentality's sake, I would have to say the Hunter, because it is just the everyman basic Joe gear, and I really like that sort of thing. They're very versatile. But just from a modeling perspective, I've really been enjoying the armigers. I played the armigers a ton. The models themselves, there's a lot of interesting shapes, and you can do a lot of playing around with the posing and how you paint them. They're really interesting that way. So I was not expecting that question. That's a good one. I also really like the Aller, but that's just because it's a castle with treads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to just pick one favorite model.
It really is. It really is.
Yeah, the Armiger is a sweet model. It's very unique, right? It's a very unique gear, quote unquote.
It is. Its lineage is more like a frame. They're evolved from the frames when Earth showed up at the end of the most recent Utopian Wars and went through the Unification Wars there. After that, they gave frames to Cogland, and they formed what we call an armiger now. And so they're from that. But yeah, they're such a unique design on the table. They're possibly the best bang for your buck and the most versatile walker unit in the game. They're good. They're really good.
Well, I definitely know who we're inviting back on for the Utopia episode. That's for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
I have a lot of depth that I can go into with Utopia. We'll put it that way. A lot of depth.
Yeah. I told Gene from the first episode, I always thought Utopia reminded me of the Tau from 40K, just how they work with the drones and the ones.
Things like
that. Yeah.
I can see that, but the Tau, the drones are secondary. They're supporting the actual field units. Utopia, that's backwards. The traditional Utopian army would be thousands and thousands of drones, and not the little Enkidus.
Oh,
like the average Utopian drone is called an auto guard, whatever you want, and is roughly between a hunter and a grizzly in beef. That's how much beef you're putting on the table with one of those. So thousands of those in massive lines with a couple humans in behind, sneaking around, being very careful as these massive armies of mostly automated and self-directed machines fight. And you're just providing kind of strategic directives to the NAIs. And that's the traditional Utopian army. What you're seeing on the tabletop right now is the UCC. It's the Utopian Colonial Corps. And they are designed with one purpose in mind. They're designed to support the CEF. And the requirement is that it had to be incredibly lightweight because you have to push it through space for quite a distance. So it was designed to be light. not powerful. So it's a very weird army. And now that you're starting to see some of the other autos and things like that, you've got the Gilgamesh and some of the bigger guys, you're starting to see a little bit more of that traditional utopian character show up again. So that's what's happening there.
Yeah, that's cool. It's going to be interesting to see what DreamPod 9 does with the faction later on. If they, start introducing more of the different sub factions and stuff like that to the roster.
Yes. Yeah, I'm hoping to see more of that kind of traditional utopian instead of just the UCC. But I can understand why they want to start there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess with that in mind, we can go ahead and start on the North. And the reason why we're starting the North today is because it is one of the main factions of Heavy Gear Blitz. Mm-hmm. The South is probably the other main faction, I would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The South have always been the core identity for the entire franchise, really, is that conflict.
Yeah. So if you're new, or even if you're a vet who plays the game and probably just wants to know more about the North, so that way you can show your skills up to those South hooligans.
Yep. And that's really the thing, because the North and the South, at first glance, look very similar. And only after you've explored them a bit can you start seeing the differences.
Yeah. And what's great about the North is that, as far as how it started, the North is really what kind of started everything. They originally started the first gears. They were the first ones to basically form after the Earth left. And I guess we can start from there. So I think I don't even know what year it was. It was about 350 years before the current time, somewhere around there. I think it's like 400 year.
Timekeeping on in the Heavy Gear universe is incredibly complicated because each of the planets has their own calendar. And like Terra Nova doesn't follow a 24-hour day. It's got a 36-hour day. And it has a very different, it only has 4 months, 4 seasons is what they call them, with 6 weeks of 7 days, each day being 36 hours. It roughly turns into about 0.7 of a year is a cycle. So yeah, timekeeping between them is really nasty. So I actually built a big spreadsheet to translate between Terra Novan time, Utopian time, Caprician time, and Earth time. It's a mess. It's a total mess. It turns out that Earth abandoned its colonies around TN 1400. And the date of the books is around 1934 to 1950. So
yeah, and I think it's around the mid 1480s that you start seeing. I think this is after. I'm pretty sure does Earth leave around the 1480s, or is it in the
Earth leaves in 1400 around?
Okay.
You start seeing the first formation of leagues in. First, there was Gropius.
1479. And I think it was the 1480s where this is probably the other part of the North that we can kind of go into.
That was actually in the South. That was the human.
Is that Manaud? Codovert?
No, Mahmud was happening in the Irian Plains up in the north. But that was the that was the formation of the Northern Lights Confederacy, which is a fairly good place to start, really.
Yeah.
Which is happening roughly around the same time as down in the South. Gropius was forming the first league, the Humanist Alliance, which dearly departed. But yeah, Mahmud Codavarian. The Codavarian is the book of Mahmud Codavarian, who is the founder of revisionism, which is the central faith of the North. And you can't really understand the North without understanding how religious it is, and that's the faith that they have. That was all happening during the Reconstruction era. So Earth leaves, everything is a complete mess. Mahmud starts gathering people with his new philosophy, his new religion, which is all about the gentle spirit. And there's no direct correlation between our religions of today and that religion. It is a kind of a brand new religion that sprang up on Terra Nova But the idea is that everyone is part of the same spirit. We're all part of this one flow of a river, I think is the term that he's cited as using. And it's all about harmony and unity with everyone and everything, with nature. So it's got a little bit of kind of religious motives that we all understand. Mahmud went on a pilgrimage, went throughout the north, preaching, and basically a very kind of prophet sort of thing. That's why they call him the prophet. And then ended up going to Masada, which is a Badlands community to the south of the Northern Lights Confederacy, which at the time did not exist. It was just a collection of city-states. He had a number of disciples with him. They're called his followers. And on his death, there was the first and second follower who had a split. It was a split based on what they thought was appropriate interpretation of Mahmud's teachings. The first follower believed that the teachings implied that you must be a pacifist. You cannot do harm to other things, other people, because that's the same as doing harm to yourself. It does harm to the body, the whole, the gentle spirit of everyone. Whereas the second follower said that sometimes you need to excise a tumor or do something to improve the harmony. Sometimes there's a disharmonious part, and in those cases, as long as you're doing the least amount of damage, it can be moral and good to cause harm, as long as the end result is harmony and health and, peace. And that he moved back to the birthplace of the prophet back in Sorrento, which is up in the north. And from there came the formation of the Northern Lights Confederacy. So now there's these two churches, these two faiths, which are technically the same, but have split. So you can look at it almost like a Christian Orthodox versus Roman Catholic, or you could look Shia and Sunni or something like that.
Two different sects.
Yes, that agree on most things, but have some rather significant disagreements in others. One of the kind of central things that really differentiates between the two is that the church in the Badlands in Masada, they have the set of teachings of the prophet, and that's what they use. Whereas the Irian Plains version, the second follower version from Sorrento, they have a book called the Code of Varia, and that's what they consider to be like their New Testament or their primary holy book, which was not written by the prophet. It was written by the second follower, whom I can't just remember his name, but the second follower wrote it as like parables and stories that he overheard from the prophet. And that's the foundation of faith for the North.
And as far as, so I'm just looking back at when the Northern Lights was being formed, so Gropius was the first one to start combining city-states together to form a league. Now, the Humanist Alliance, was that eventually evolved into the UMF?
No, that's happening in the South. The Humanist Alliance, go ahead.
Is all South.
Yeah.
Gropius
is in the South. Gropius was the foundation of the Humanist Alliance, which is almost like if you've ever read Plato's Republic, it was modeled off of that. A very designed society. And it was annexed by the Southern Republic in 1942. I can't remember exactly the date, but very recently in a storyline, it was annexed. Whereas this is happening up in the north, the leagues haven't yet formed. There are just nascent, brand new city-states. And we should probably go into a little bit about what city-states and leagues are, because they're not nations.
Yep. Let's segue into that.
Yeah. Well, we're following the history here. I've got the book open.
Okay, fair enough.
So, Jacob and Nathani are the names on it. Nathani moved to Sorrento in the north, and that is the beginning of the North. The Northern Lights Confederacy formed shortly after the Humanist Alliance. It was 1525. This is the age of league formation. So at this point, the city-states have formed. A city-state on Terra Nova is the functional political unit. There are leagues, there are confederations, there are all kinds of stuff, but the functional unit is the city-state. Terra Nova, it's hard to really communicate how different Terra Nova is because they don't have oceans. The amount of land mass on Terra Nova is staggering. The amount of empty space that you can travel through, and there are living things in, certainly, but there's no people. Like there's 1 billion people living on Terra Nova, but imagine Earth with no oceans. How much empty space there would be. It's massive. So each city-state is basically an island unto itself. They are connected to one another. They have frequent communication, but each one has to be able to handle itself. So most city-states during this age of formation built massive walls for a couple of reasons. It's a very stormy planet because of the sandstorms and things like that. That's just the nature of the world. So they built these walls as storm walls. Also, during this initial period, there was a lot of raiding because remember, this place basically fell apart and people on Terra Nova were desperate during the years after, or I should say, during the cycles after Earth left. So raiders and rovers are a constant problem up to the present day. That's not something that's gone away, though city-states themselves are much more resilient now, obviously, and they don't get attacked by raiders. But they built these massive walls, and they have their own internal politics, and they have their own stuff going on in ways that we don't see on Earth because cities tend to be much more connected into nations. So during this period of alliances, when the Northern Lights Confederacy formed, it was basically a loose conglomeration of these city-states that had a shared religion at this point. They all had a shared religion and shared purposes. Their purpose in the North, because the Northern Lights Confederacy was basically the first Northern League, was religious. Cooperation, peace, and association, as opposed to down in the South where we started seeing the Allied Southern Territories form due to the Southern Republic deciding that it really liked the land that its neighbors had. It's like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so as far as after the Northern Lights were forming, who was the next to form? Was it the UMF or was it the Western?
It was the Western Frontier Protectorate that formed next, actually very close to. This is not too surprising. The Western Frontier Protectorate is quite small and they have a very strong shared culture, so it's not surprising they came together. The UMF formed next, probably about 20, 30 cycles afterwards, though they formed from something called the Leoness League, which is a completely different thing. The Leoness League was an early form of the UMF that was not capitalist. It was much more egalitarian and socialist and was eaten alive by the corporations. And the corps took it over and it became the United Mercantile Federation.
Yeah, and I think it was the Western Frontier Protectorate. I think why they formed so much was because they were like the closest to the Badlands and
Yes.
They were suffering a lot from bandits and attacks from warlords. And because of that, they
Correct.
had to just band together for that reason.
Their city-states are the most fortified, approaching like when the CEF attacked during the War of the Alliance, the Western Frontier Protectorate basically took it on the chin. And most of their territory was taken, but none of their city-states were, because they are massive fortresses. The Western Frontier Protectorate is a military state where if you want to be a full citizen with voting rights, you need to have served your 5 cycles at minimum. The culture is clan-based, so clans and families are very important. If you immigrate there, you're adopted by a clan, or if you're clanless, then you're a second-class citizen. You're a resident. You're not a citizen. And yeah, they have an incredibly martial culture. They have a very tight, closed culture because of that threat from the South of raiders and warlords and things like that really formed that culture.
Yeah, it's crazy because when I was looking into the Western Frontier, I think the Western Frontier is probably my favorite.
They're cool.
Yeah, they're my favorite state out of the 3. And what I like about them is that so you have to serve in the military for, I think it's about five.
5 cycles.
Is it 5 cycles?
I think
Yeah,
it's
5 cycles at least. And then to gain citizenship. And it's crazy because only a quarter of their population actually has citizenship. It only goes up to a third during, I think it's one of the wars. I'm not too sure if it's the War of the Alliance that bumps
That's
up the numbers.
probably the War of the Alliance, yeah.
Yeah. And it's even crazy because if you come from somewhere like UMF or the Northern Lights, you actually have to serve 10 to 20 cycles to get citizenship because they're so like tight knit and closed off to strangers.
Well, a good example of that is I believe it's Eden Smythe. No, it's Lang Regina, the commander. Oh, is it? It's one of those two. Which one? No, it is Eden Smythe. No, okay, I can't remember which one. It's one of the two. Okay, so there's Victoria Eden Smythe and there's Lang Regina, two military commanders of the CNCS, and it's Lang Regina. She has been technically a citizen of the Western Frontier Protectorate for ages, and she is a decorated and globally renowned hero of the War of the Alliance, and they still watch her every move. It is incredibly close-knit, and your lineage is everything there. It reminds me quite a bit of feudal Japan, where your clan and your family associations are you. That is who you are. And if you're adopted, you forever carry the stigma of being adopted. Even though you technically have the same rights and privileges, you're not. It's not the same. So yeah, it's a super cool society. And that actually leads into a segue of what kind of happened next, really.
Yeah, and I think we can, I think this is probably the big point where all three of them kind of decided to join together. And it starts with the UMF, correct?
It does. The UMF didn't intend it, but they did, yeah.
Because they're just they're a corporation at this point. They're just pretty hungry for adding more city-states from what I don't know if you want to more elaborate on that.
Yeah, that's called the Merchants' War. And this is something that kind of brewed for a long period of time, where the Leoness League disappears, eaten up by the UMF, and the UMF is still hungry because that's what they do. They buy stuff and they're always looking for resources. So they
got to expand.
That's right. That's exactly what they do. And they take a look to the south and they recognize that the Western frontier is actually quite weak by comparison. They're already facing pressure from the south, so if they came in, they could probably gobble them up. At the same time, they also recognize that there is some early friendship and cooperation between the Western frontier and the Northern Lights Confederacy. So they recognize that they would be in the middle of a two-front war if they decided to do that. So, of course, they decided to do that. They figured they could take it. And the scary thing is they almost did. They were almost able to pull off what the Southern Republic tried in the South and made a big push to take chunks of both leagues. This led to the first year, actually. This is called the Merchants' War. It is the conflict between the Northern Leagues, a rough alliance between the Northern Lights Confederacy and the Western Frontier. In Pioneer, which is one of the northernmost city-states on the planet, was the first place that gears emerged. And they were basically the first attempts for the Hunter that helped try to push into Pioneer. Early gear use was, I should finish that off by saying that all three of the Northern Leagues realized that the South was going to be taking advantage of Northern weakness because of this horrible little war that they were all experiencing. So they decided, hey, maybe we should stop fighting one another and protect ourselves from the South, which was the formation of the CNCS. So that's how the Northern Confederacy formed. It's formed as a response to a threat. It's basically like NATO. At least that's how it began, was NATO. A defensive union between the three leagues to prevent the Southern Republic from showing up and smashing them in. Also the Mekong Dominion, which is very much the foe of the UMF. But I recognize you probably want to say something in there, but there is something interesting to be said about that war that had the emergence of gears and early gear warfare.
Yeah, and I think also when they first came out with the Hunter, it was basically just a standard walker that they used for like other tasks, and they just decided to put military equipment on it. That's basically
the first was basically the hard hat, which was a colonization era technology. It was used by the colonists as basically a forklift, because they recognized that when they were doing stuff on the planet, they weren't going to have nice paved roads or anything. So they wanted something that could do work in very rough environments. They could climb and get around without relying on treads or wheels. So that was the hard hat. And they basically just weaponized it. And that goes well before the war in Pioneer. Like the Western Frontier Protectorate was just basically strapping weapons onto these construction vehicles and using them to fight off. That's always been happening on Terra Nova ever since Earth left. But Pioneer represented the first time that was done in a coordinated military fashion, where they developed them specifically for that task. And it was still cobbled together at that point, but it developed into the Hunter. Hunter Mark 1, I should say.
Yeah, and what makes the North, they kind of see more of the good guys in a way, even though they're really not. But
they're not, but yeah.
When they formed together, it almost became, as far as their government structure work, each of the UMF, the Northern Lights, and the Western Protectorate, they all are independent still, and they both have equal share of power generally.
They do, though. The actual politics tends to lay out with the UMF and the NLC butting heads constantly, and the Western Frontier being a bit of a kingmaker. And it's just after the War of the Alliance that the Western Frontier really comes into that role, when they realize, oh, what we say goes. They need us in order to actually do what they want to do. So they really start playing up after the War of the Alliance and pushing for their own concessions, recognizing that they're holding the balance of power.
Yeah, and I kind of, you can go pretty deep into the politics with these factions, which is pretty nuts. And I'll just glance over some of the basics of it. The Northern Lights is the largest. It has the most the largest population of the North generally, and when it comes to voting, they generally carry the most votes, so they have a bigger say in what kind of decisions are made generally.
Yeah.
And I think one of the coolest things that I like is that during war times, they usually nominate one. I don't know what the term is called for them. It's basically like a general that kind of takes in charge of the military operations and has a more dictatorship with it. Yes. I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is the name? And I'm pretty sure that's Eden Smythe right now. I should have just left that PDF up. But yeah, that is a thing that they do. It's based on an old Roman technique. That's what the Romans used to do. Yeah, exactly. And just for the terms of, I can't remember the name of the title, but for the terms of the conflict, they are basically the commander. Though that's often in name only, they still have to recognize that their power can be taken from them if they're shown to not be effective. So it is a very political thing. And that kind of plays into the central north-south dynamic differences. In the north, there is a lot of social control. It's not social control. It's like social morality is much more conservative in the north. There are morality laws. I think there's even sumptuary laws, things like that, depending on the city-state. Because again, remember, the city-state is the functional unit of governance. So if the city-state decides that it wants to do things differently, it can. But in the north, it tends to be much more conservative that way. But politically, it's much more liberal and free, which, for better or worse, means that you're going to have a lot more political parties, and there's a lot of political consideration to be made in any decision. Whereas in the South, it is very socially open. You can do whatever you want. There's very little in the way of morality laws or things of that nature. But politics is very dirty, and it's not free. It's not liberal. Like they make a pretense of democracy, but it's nothing of the sort. That's the difference between the two.
Yeah, it definitely seems like that. Yeah, because it feels like there's a lot of shady stuff. Like even when I was reading it, they talk about a lot of espionage, and people just taking advantage of the system and all that.
Yeah.
And I think we can lead into more of the big wars that I guess the North was
that is a good,
kind of interested
that is a good point for it.
Yeah. Gene, do you have any other things that do you think that we maybe need to discuss on with maybe more of the factions or whatever? I think we hit all the points for the most part.
Nope.
I'd still like to go a little bit more into the national character, but sorry, go ahead,
No.
Oh, no,
national
absolutely.
character is just fine.
Yeah.
Good.
Go ahead.
Let's go through the history before we talk about the specifics in detail of the nations as they are now, because they changed over time, obviously. But we'll go on to the big wars, because that's really what happens after the leagues form, is big wars. Up until this point, all of the wars, including the unification wars in the South, the Northern wars are basically skirmishes. And one of the character of these initial wars, like the Merchant War is the first big Northern war, and the first emergence of the gear. I want to talk a little bit about how gears were originally used, because they weren't fielded in squads at first. There weren't enough of them. So the hunter's first use was an individual hunter was the bodyguard or support unit for infantry. So you'd have infantry bombing around in APCs with one gear lugging around its light autocannon, which was considered like a big gun at the time.
Yeah.
And it became a very interesting dynamic, because when two forces encountered one another and fought, the infantry would be fighting one another, but it would be one gear versus one gear, generally. And that's where Terra Nova's dueling tradition comes from, is the fact that on top of this layer of the firefights of the infantry fighting one another for dominance, the gears stood head and shoulders, and torso and waist above everything else. And quite often what would happen is, if the firefight looked like it was getting really nasty, the gears would say, take cover, and they would call out their opponent. And there became this kind of a unwritten rule: if you got called out while you were piloting a gear, you got to answer, and it's a one-on-one fight. Nobody else gets involved. And if your side loses, you retreat, because the other side has a gear and you don't. So of course you retreat. But that's where the Terra Novan definition of dueling and honorable piloting, and also why they went crazy for the gear, came from that, because it was such a dramatic and cinematic and high profile thing. Like, they're basically the fighter jet pilots of Terra Nova, as gear pilots. That was inherited by the South when the South picked up gears as well, and they fortified that into the De Leon code, which is the duelist's code, and they turned that into an actual mannerism. But you still see that behavior to the present day on Terra Nova, where in the middle of a big fight, or if on the eve of a fight, if it looks like it's going to just be a real grinder, one duelist will call the other one out. And at least according to the way things are supposed to be done, and it often is done this way, the two duelists will go out, they'll have their duel in front of everyone, will see it, they'll watch it, and then the side that loses will retreat. They will give ground. And of course, they'll take up new positions and get ready to continue the war. But for that brief moment in time, they will give that ground. So that's one of the central characters of Terra Novan warfare, which none of the other factions have. And I would also argue that Peace River and New Cold don't have it to the same extent as North and South, because in the North and South, they have generations of warfare fought this way, whereas the other ones are much smaller. So that's
and I assume even to this day, if two players play North and they fight against each other, as part in the war lore, are there still skirmishes between the Northern Lights, basically the three states, right? Like, are there still skirmishes between those factions, or for the most part, it's peaceful?
Not really. If they are, they're small skirmishes, and they are basically considered friendly fire, blue on blue sorts of things. In the South, you'll see that kind of thing happening because it's not a voluntary alliance between the sides. But in the North, it is much more of a NATO situation where everyone is on the same side, and and that's, again, the difference between the North and the South is the South, it's much nastier, it's much dirtier. They're perfectly willing to fight one another to get their political aims done. Whereas in the North, that's in the political arena, and assassins and espionage and that kind of stuff. But out and out warfare doesn't really happen between the leagues.
Are these duels just hand-to-hand combat, or is it just more like you can just shoot autocannons at each other and just...
It's actually really interesting and a lot of fun. In the South, the De Leon Code says you're supposed to use rapiers because it's based off of personal dueling. De Leon was a rapier duelist, and he just basically, I think it was an iguana that he used. Whereas in the North, dueling is a pragmatic thing. Dueling is like, you don't use a weapon that's impractical. You're in a giant multi-ton war vehicle. You're carrying a big gun. Of course, you're using the gun. Don't be ridiculous. So they have something that's called a sniper duel. For example, if two regiments have beef with one another, they got a problem with each other in the North, they will often have a duel. And their two duelists will go into a rough area and they will basically try and shoot one another. They're not allowed to cross into each other's territory. You have to stay on basically opposite sides of the board for a table. There's plenty of cover, and it's a game of patience and careful aim. And you're basically trying to show how good a shot you are with it and how good you are at avoiding being shot. Very different character from the South, which is very much, here's your swords, stab each other until one of you stops moving. That's the Southern duel. And there's rules for all this. Like in the old tactical game, I ran tons of Northern and Southern duels. You run the Northern duel double blind, so the other players literally don't know where the other one is on the table. And I have seen some absolutely wild Northern duels. Absolutely, like, just so tense because they're literally 3 inches from each other on the table, but they're moving so carefully, they haven't detected one another until finally one of them does, and then there's an explosion of movement. Usually one of them dies. Sometimes they manage to get out there and they just book it. And it's super exciting.
It does sound like a ton of fun.
Oh, so much fun. So much fun. In open war between North and South, the manner of the duel is usually a lot less formal. Usually it's just the case of Northern commander calls Southern commander, or vice versa, says, let's have a duel. The other one is generally honor bound to agree because it's usually done on open comms and everyone will hear if they refuse the duel. And then the duelists go out and fight however they want to. The duelists might call one another and say, hey, let's do this with swords. They may just start firing at each other. It's open, and all of that is considered honorable in that context. So that's dueling.
That's awesome.
Super cool. If you have the chance, I would really recommend picking up both of the dueling books. They're really neat, and they go through all of the different kinds of duels because there's numerous kinds of duels. I ran a dueling league a couple times. I've run some dueling leagues, and everyone basically comes up with their own role-playing character, and they design their own gear. I took Big Red, which is the regimental duelist for Norgard's 74th Nova Red Riders. It's a stock grizzly with a big old gun painted completely red. And I took him, and then I took a bunch of different ammunition types in various magazines that he carried. That was the duelist. That's where dueling comes from. It's actually a Northern thing.
Yeah, that's interesting how they started that up. And I didn't even realize there was like dueling books. And especially with, I don't know how much you can integrate, but I'm pretty sure you can have a combined the 3.0 rules, maybe something more simplified with, because I assume the dueling book is an older book.
Dueling book is based on the old role-playing tactical system. But a lot of the dueling stuff is just, here's how you set up the scenario. So this is how you have a Northern duel. This is how you have a Southern duel. This is how you play Gearball. This is how you play Fox and Hounds. All of these different duel styles of like commercial dueling and sport dueling and underground illegal dueling and all that stuff, because it is a sport there too. You can just, there's professional leagues of duelists where they buy their top end gears and they have all these different competitive duels.
It's interesting that even in the 3.0 rules that duelists are still a thing. Everyone that I talk to loves duelists. I think duelists is a very, very important part and like a big deal when it comes to heavy gear blitz in general. Yep. And the fact that North was the first ones to start that, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, even though it is more of a Southern thing at this point, because again, the North has always been very pragmatic about it. They're duelists, but their duelists are specifically there to win the fight. They're not there to show off flashy sword skills. They're not going to do anything like that. They are just going to shoot you and you'll be dead, and that's the end of the duel. Whereas in the South, because it's tied to personal honor, which is a much bigger thing in the Southern Republic, it is much more about doing the duel in the right way and showing that you're very skilled with a sword and things like that. So yeah, big difference, but both very important.
Yeah, awesome.
That opened up into something called St. Vincent's War, which I would argue is the most important war on Terra Nova.
It is crazy because I was talking with Gene about it earlier. It's crazy how accurate the lore is when it comes to what kind of takes place during the St. Vincent War, because especially during our times right now, like it's just weird how Dreampod 9 was predicting the numbers, and we have a similar thing happening now, which is very weird. If you want to go ahead and explain more about it, it's between the South and the North.
The basic concept was that the St. Vincent was a colonization era medical ship that crashed into the Badlands during the evacuation of Terra Nova. And Terra Nova is still littered with ships and wreckage from that period that have yet to be explored because the planet's so big. And the wreck was found by both sides about the same time, and they both sent out gear. I think it was full sections, just a section of gear. So a section of gears is 15 gears. It's 3 squads of 5. And so a very small number of gears basically got into a fight over the wreck of the St. Vincent because both sides wanted to salvage it, to see what kind of technologies were in there and see if there was any kind of useful records or things like that. And in so doing, they damaged the ship further and ruptured some of the environmental seals in what turned out to be some very biohazardous containers containing what turned out to be a horrible plague, the St. Vincent's plague, which was very deadly, but specifically it killed 5% of the children on Terra Nova, which is a monstrous number.
Yeah, it's interesting because it didn't actually kill the soldiers that got it. They actually were just carriers, and then when they went home, they spread it around to everyone.
Now,
and and basically both sides blamed each other, and it became, instead of a war just like conquest or territories, which they probably still did anyways. It was mostly just about vengeance because they basically blamed each other for it.
All of the old motivations still existed, and honestly, those old motivations were still the motivations. They still were doing it for economic and territorial superiority. That's what they do. That's Terra Nova. But now they did it with a lot more anger. Absolutely. You were going to say something there?
Oh, no.
Gotcha.
It was...
Yeah. It was
the nail in the coffin.
Absolutely. And that's a horrible double entendre there.
Literally.
The big thing with it, a couple of things came out from the war, the St. Vincent's War, that formed Terra Nova as it is known currently in the storyline. First of all, it's the first major war that put the gear front and center. And it was the first major global war. It was between the North and the South. It was the first big one between the superpowers. It was something that set the character of enmity between the North and the South. They hate each other. Going back to the Western Frontier Protectorate, keep in mind that all of those places are very family and clan based. Now you have a disease that they think was released by the Southern Republic that killed a lot of their children. the Western Frontier Protectorate was howling for blood. That's the point where you saw a huge surge in people going for citizenship. Not because they wanted citizenship, they wanted revenge.
Yeah, they wanted revenge. Yeah. And it makes sense, because if your kid dies from a plague and you're obviously going to blame the other side. In fact, the plague was so bad that actually it was Caprice, which we'll talk in a later episode, but they actually got the plague and actually stopped their shipments for 2 decades, or Terra Nova time. But it was like they stopped their shipment for a long time because of how bad the plague
was. It was absolutely terrible, and it defined the northern and southern relationship. That relationship changed over time, but it has never lost that edge of just unthinking hate, which came from the fact that a huge portion of the population, like you could, if there was a chart of the population of Terra Nova, you would see a significant dip at that war in ways that other wars wouldn't have, because of the death of the children. This leads into a long period of skirmishing and things like that. It doesn't technically have a name. I think there's the Brushfire Wars or something like that. This leads up into the 1800s, TN 1800, 1850 or so, where you start seeing the regiments of renown that are known, the current regiments and the current structures of Terra Nova show up during this time period. This leads into something called the Judas Syndrome, which is a period of Cold War, where the skirmishing continues, but it's in the back burner while the international intel community goes crazy, and everyone knows a second war is coming. Everyone knows something really big is brewing. So there's this arms race on both sides. That's where you see the grizzly developed. That's where you see the cheetah developed. That's where you see in the South a lot of the Southern stuff really come into its own instead of just being Northern knockoffs and redesigns. That's formed then. That's the Judas.
Yeah, and I think we can touch upon this, but besides the hunter, the North has, give me a second. The North has a lot of, their names usually come from mammals. And as far as, we touched on this in the first episode, but generally in the North has a lot more mountain ranges and forest areas. And I'm not too sure how accurate that is as far as the north side of it. If you want to maybe,
okay. I can go into.
I mean, it's more of a side topic, but I was just wanting to put
I'll finish up the history, and then we'll go into the gears, and we'll touch on the kind of terrain that the Northern Guard is designed for, and the territories that they have.
And at this point, during this Cold War, right? Mm-hmm. Is that when basically the CEF kind of comes in at this point?
Yeah, the CEF shows up, and it was the stupidest thing they could have ever done. If they had done a little bit of intel, the intel would have told them, hey, maybe wait a little while. That's what the intel would have told them. But no, because they're the Earthers, they just go piling in there, figuring they can take out this planet. And they almost did, to be perfectly fair. But they couldn't have hit Terra Nova at a worse time. Terra Nova was raring for war, ready. It was building just massive forces on all sides. And that's what they landed square in between, may I add. They dropped square in between the two forces. So it is a testament to the CEF's military acumen and technological superiority, how hard they pushed. The War of the Alliance represents the first point of cooperation between North and the South. And even then, the North and the South combined was not quite enough to do it. It took the involvement of Paxton Arms and Peace River, which up to that point had been very neutral. They were just a neutral arms dealer. They'd sell to anybody. They refused to get involved. And it was only after they saw how the war was going and they realized they could tip the balance back in favor of Terra Nova that they got involved. And it was also the involvement of Kata, Carradine Army, and just basically a big mess of duelists in Junkers that managed to push the Earth back. The War of the Alliance is very much a World War I analog, which is funny to think of because the CEF tanks are ridiculously fast. They are very much more They're like fighter jets, just they're tanks. That's all. They're very fast, but they have a very short deployment range. They can only go about 200 kilometers away from a refueling station. So they kind of work in hops. They go 200 kilometers, they build a refueling station, and then supplies get hoofed up. And they just keep on doing these in hops. It was a slow expansion of the CEF until finally Terra Nova could put enough supplies on that wall to stop that expansion. And then it was a slow deflation as Cata and Peace River started joining in until finally the CEF surrendered.
And what would you say some of the like big things that North was known for during this war? Was there any special things that the North kind of did, or?
Well, both the North and the South were incredibly desperate at the time. They stopped producing some of their higher end vehicles because they just knew they needed bodies. They needed bulk on the line. So they just started pumping out Hunters and Jagers, both North and South. The War of the Alliance is where their national strategic character comes into being. And for the North, that is basically a counter to the expansionist push of the CEF. The Northern Doctrine is about maintaining a rock solid defensive line that you slowly advance. And you basically make that line a no man's zone where nobody wants to be. If you do not want to get close to the North, a Northern Guard line will destroy anything close to it. And then it uses specialists to aid the advance of that slow conservative push. Whereas the South has basically done something that's more in line with their traditional doctrines from controlling and maintaining power within the Allied Southern Territories, in which case it's more about a broken front line. It's a disruptive line in depth where you have units of Jagers and their support infiltrating around strong points and trying to push in behind stuff and being much more of a dynamic, fluid, and less strong wall. Whereas the North is very much this is my line of hunters, don't get anywhere near it, or walk in that direction, you better not be there when we get there. That's the North.
Yeah. And at this point, they repel the Earth invaders, they retreat. And so as far as like the recent lore, tensions still arise and skirmishes still break out between the North and South.
Oh, they have the war continues.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wait, there's more.
There's more. Yeah, after the Earthers were pushed back and there was a surrender, there was a relatively brief internecine period of about 20 cycles or so, up until 1935, at which point the second follower, you remember the second follower, the leader of the Church of the North, the second follower of revisionist faith, is assassinated. Thor Hutchinson is his name. He was basically the Winston Churchill of the North. He wasn't really a strategic genius, and he wasn't in a position where he commanded anything, but he made daily audio broadcasts across the North. And that was what the voice of the people was. It was the wall. Like his ability to maintain morale and just keep everybody fighting and working in these frankly awful conditions, because the War of the Alliance was the most brutal war that the planet had ever seen. His voice unified the North in a way that it had never been. And then he got assassinated. Arguably, the assassin was just a soldier who had been disgruntled because he wasn't a revisionist. He was Jerusalemite. And he was upset with the increasing religious fervor of the revisionist faith, because it was the revisionist faith has grown to be a lot more zealous, especially over the course of the War of the Alliance. That's what kept the War of the Alliance going for the North, is their faith. And then he was assassinated, and everyone assumed it was the South that had done it. And that's where you get the interpolar war, where the North goes on a crusade into the South. And it goes on it's actually a relatively brief war. It's a couple cycles long until Peace River is blown up with an antimatter bomb. Oops.
A
A bit of an oops. at which point contacts between the North and the South that have been kept quiet since the Interpolar War, because since the War of the Alliance, contact between the North and the South breaks down quite quickly because they go back to their old habits of hating one another. But some of them maintain contacts with one another called the Westphalia Cabinet. Westphalia is where the peace treaty at the end of the War of the Alliance was. These groups come into contact with each other. They say, hey, Earth is still gunning for us. They just blew up Peace River. We need to provide a combined front against them. So peace is declared between both sides. And that's where the Black Talons come from, is the Westphalia Cabinet and the remains of Peace River.
Yeah. And basically, as far as like the timeline goes, we're at this scene in 40K at one point with, it was like the strike before midnight. And you see this with Heavy Gear Blitz, where the CEF has come back. They brought Caprice with them. They brought Utopia.
Yes.
I don't know how far in the lore they go as far as if it's almost like one of those ending scenes where you see the massive fleet approaching Terra Nova and then stops, or do they go a bit into the Second War?
The most recent stuff that's happened is War for Terra Nova 1 and 2, which is a old Blitz supplement series.
Some great set of books.
Excellent books. Really good. I know the guy who wrote them. They're great. So what happens is, first, Earth, before they reinvade, they do something called Operation Icarus. Operation Icarus is the gate opens, a bunch of the CEF fleet comes by and bombs the crap out of Terra Nova in a quick lightning raid. They drop off some raiders, but mostly they just bomb the crap out of all of the heavy lift capacity of the planet. They destroy anything that can push a significant mass from the surface to the orbit, and they also take care of a lot of the orbital defense structures. And then they're gone again. So they go in, blitz it, get out again. Shortly after that is when the War for Terra Nova starts, where they come back with everything else, and then they do their landing. So that's where we are right now. If you read War for Terra Nova 1 and 2, it goes into some of the campaigns from the landing zones and things like that. Yeah, I really recommend it. That book is very much a scenario book, basically, those two books. But they go into a lot of detail about what's happening where and which forces are where and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, which I like, because it puts you like in control of what the narrative is like, right? I mean, and I think it's a good spot. I hope that like DreamCon 9 kind of explores more of it, some of the battles and stuff. But at this point, I think it's a pretty solid ending point for players just to still create the narrative.
Absolutely.
For them.
Even though the rule system changed between there and here, all of the scenarios still work just fine and can provide some really interesting campaign material.
Yes, they can.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great stuff. So I'm going to go to the bathroom because I've been sitting here with a glass of water for way too long. So I'll be back in a couple of minutes. If you want to edit that out, that'll be fine.
Oh, yeah. And then I think as soon as you get back, or Colin, I think he left, but we can just go into some of the what kind of the North looks like, a bit of the Northern Guard, some of the more military aspects, and then from there we could probably just go into tactics. What do you think, Gina? Do you think we kind of need to go a different route with that, or?
No, I completely agree. We can start talking about looks of the models and then segue into playstyle.
Yep.
I completely agree.
Because we already touched on it, that what the landscape is. I know it's kind of different per. Like I was reading the Western Protectorate, and they have a different look.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, man, I forgot how many units there are in the North.
Yep, North and South have tons of things.
Yeah, I'm gonna be reading off some of the stats of the stuff. I'm not gonna be like, oh, this is what the Hunter Wildfire looks like. I'll probably name some key stuff off, and I'll probably need your advice, Gene, because you a bit more of the North on the table than I do. So hopefully you can pitch in
a little bit.
Yeah, and since you play South, you could probably be like, oh, that's in the Iguana.
North and South are vastly different.
Oh, they are, yes. With their loadouts, especially.
Yeah.
Trying to think. Yeah, most of this stuff is really. If you really just compress things down into the model type, it the list isn't that long. But like when you're on Gear Grinder, it's like,
Yeah, it's just
oh
because it lists all the variants.
yeah, which the best, like the closest thing I remember to that was something in like Tau used to have this in the lore where they would have different types of like names for the loadouts. So for example, if you had like this gun and this gun, it would be called a fire knife or a hellstorm. And I think they do the same thing with heavy gear where they just name different variants
And we're
cool
back.
names. Awesome.
Cool.
So we're going to talk about the Northern Guard, the character of the North, and some of the vehicle variants. Is that what we're doing?
Yes, you're spot
yep.
on.
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Oh, no, I was just going to say, and then we're going to just go straight into the tactics, the models, more of
Perfect.
the tabletop side. So
perfect. I do want to talk about it from a tabletop perspective too. First of all, the North is not actually more mountainous. They have about as much mountain as both. What they have in the North that the South doesn't have is a lot more of a colder polar biome. There's a northern ice cap, whereas there's not one in the South. So the first vehicles that you see come from the North that are based on the climber variant are actually the polar grizzly and things like that. And polar grizzly variant with a gigantic mortar and climbing gear, and it's designed specifically to defend the northern pole. They're very rare, very uncommon, but wow, are they effective? Do they do a good job? Yes, they do. They absolutely do. The character of the North, it's a lot more of a kind of temperate biome. A lot of force is absolutely true. The North could be said, the mountains could be said to be more important to the North because the northern border of the Western Frontier Protectorate is mountains. It's basically ringed on three sides by mountains, and then the southern side is just open to the desert. So being able to hold and defend those mountains is extremely important for Western Frontier Protectorate sovereignty.
Yeah, because we'll get to the tabletop portion in a second, but you see in a lot of the profiles that they have the climb ability with a lot of their gears, and even some of the names, like you have the mountain hunter and stuff like that.
Yep.
So that actually makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah, a lot of that was added as a game design reason as well, because they wanted something to make the North feel a little different, and they already had some climbing gears, so they thought, well, let's push in that direction, which makes sense for the North. So I don't have a problem with that at all. It makes sense for them to have that. The Northern Strategic Doctrine, I briefly talked about saying was like a big wall. That is something that is a little harder to do with Living Rulebook. It used to be back in the day, back in my day, that the hunter or Yager was basically king of the battlefield. You would not want to step up to a squad of hunters or Yagers that was calmly marching down the middle of the road. They will destroy anything that gets close to them. They are incredibly good at that. And that's the center of the Northern Strategic Doctrine. You have a bunch of these guys. Every squad is, or I say the core GP squad is headhunter, 3 hunters, and an assault hunter. So you've got 3 light autocannons, the commander with his light autocannon, and then you have a snubbed cannon. Those light autocannons are providing general suppression firepower, and they're able to operate as a unit, so they're able to do lots of cross-firing and have a very good control of the area around them. And the snub cannon ensures that if anything actually dares to step up to that squad, is soon a smoking crater. It's very bad at force projection. It's very bad at pushing beyond its kind of little sphere of influence, but it controls that sphere of influence.
Like a boss.
I cannot communicate to you how scary it is to see 2 GP squads slowly marching up the middle of the field. It doesn't like, yeah, okay, you've got some Cobras. Cool, that's great. You've got some Mambas. Oh, that's awesome. I'm still going to destroy them just with hunters, just hunters. Very good.
I've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary.
They are very good at it. Other than that, the big thing to remember with the North is that their basic vehicles are incredibly good and they're specialized at what they do. They are not designed to handle multiple roles. They're not generalists. The Cheetah is a great recon scout unit. Sucks as a skirmisher. It's not good.
That's what you're getting is a scout.
Exactly. It'll do a great job of it. Don't ask it to do anything else. So the North is very much about a very combined arms cooperative model. You can't just take a squad and toss it out there and ask it to do its best. It's not going to do very well. You need to be able to coordinate between everything. Your communication system is quite important for that reason. So you're going to need comms. You're going to need ECM. Fortunately, your comms and ECM are quite good. Yeah.
And as we and it's interesting because as we get more into the other factions, you will definitely see how what we mean by like more direct, more specialized, because you can see the different loadouts of the South, and you're like seeing a more general traits and stuff that kind of fit everything. And then you look at the North and you're like, oh, it doesn't have an answer for this per se on this.
It doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. And the reason is that model is not supposed to do that. There's something else.
Yeah.
So absolutely. They do have a couple exceptions, and there are places where the character kind of inverts itself a little bit, but in general, that's how it works. Some of the Jaguars can be very good generalists, and I continue to this day to think that Tiger is possibly the best generalist on the field. I don't know if we have time for it, but I have a little story of an old tactical campaign that two friends of mine ran through between the CEF and the North. It was a thing of legend. It was very cool.
Yeah, I think towards the end of the segment we could definitely discuss that.
But go ahead.
And this is from the lore perspective, right? Because what you're explaining is generally what you see on the tabletop as well. So I assume that in the lore they have the similar type of military style.
Their military style is very much as I've described it. They tend to operate in brigade-sized units where multiple regiments are mutually supporting one another. They're quite dependent on that. The regiment on Terra Nova, their military structures are slightly different. The regiment is the fundamental unit for military organization. Each regiment is designed to handle a single task, especially with the North. That's really it. For example, the 9th, the Cat's Paws, they are commandos. If you want fire support, ask someone else. They have almost none. Whereas if you have my unit, the 74th Nova Red Riders, they have a specialized squadron called the Highly Mobile Artillery, the HMA squad. And the HMA squad is basically Grizzlies, Kodiaks, and Bears. But they don't just sit back and, they're disgusting. They're gigantic squads or squads the size, but they're gigantic gears. They will provide artillery on the bounce. And so they're not technically assault because they don't have assault weapons, but they are moving right alongside with the assault units, providing directed firepower as needed as they move in.
And I don't know how accurate this is with and this is more on the lore, but it also, you can see it with the sublist.
Yep.
The Northern Guard is the general army of the North. So like everyone pitches in for that. And then, but like, for example, the Northern Lights, they still have their own specific standing army that they hold on to, right?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep. The Northern Guard is the army of the CNCS. It is basically, if you considered that NATO had an army of their own and everyone pitched into NATO's army, that's what the Northern Guard would be. Their purpose is to defend all of the northern states. It is the largest army in the North. Certainly not the largest army on Terra Nova. Norguard is well-trained, well-equipped. They have high technology units. They tend to be smaller than the Southern Militia, but again, their morale is higher. They're better trained. They're a high-quality army. Whereas if you take a look at the leagues, the Northern Lights Confederacy, again, a good army, relatively small. They've really pitched into Norguard a lot. That's where most of their kind of military budget goes. The Western Frontier Protectorate is fiercely independent and extraordinarily militaristic. So they have their own stuff, but they don't have the funding. So they tend to use junkier second tier units, but they squeeze as much as they can out of them, and they're quite good at that. So that's where you get that sublist from. And then the UMF, everything in the UMF is a corporation. So if you wanted to start your own army in the UMF, you just start the business. And then if you make money, then you can have your army. But the UMFA is a business. And most of their budget actually comes from captured war material.
Yeah, and you can kind of see when we get to the sublist later on in the episode that they have a lot more like better upgrades for the gears. By the looks of it, they seem to have a bit more funding towards that type of stuff. They even have hackers, which in the rules, I don't know how that much relates to the lore, but
not much.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so it's mostly just the funding of what they have for a corporation.
The corporations in the UMF tend to have a lot of electronics in their military. They tend to focus quite a bit on electronic warfare and communications and that sort of stuff. And I think that's how that's been portrayed in Living Rulebook, is hackers and things like that, which is fine. That's the kind of stuff that they're doing out there, sure. But I would probably characterize the UMFA as being just really good units. Take a look through the Gears and Striders book to see which corporations and which gears are actually manufactured in the UMF, and then that's what you're looking at. I believe that you'd be looking at Kamiri. Is maybe? No, it's North. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Cheyenne. I bet you.
And the Western Protectorate has what, more veterans, I assume? What's their like military based off? More veteran based?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's experience. They are much more dedicated soldiers. It's much more family tradition sort of stuff that makes them join the military, and it's much more a point of personal pride for them. Whereas in the other forces, it's much more just like it's a job. Obviously, individuals vary, and you will have individuals who join because that's what they want to do. But in general, the Western Frontier Protectorate, militarism is a part of life. And that really reflects in the army as well. Whereas go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry to cut you off. And I think the Northern Lights are the hardest for me to decide, like what their military is mostly like. I know they have an option for a chaplain in the rules, but I don't know how that like really relates to what they're like in the lore. Do they just have good morale?
What they're an army. They are an army. And that's one of the problems with the kind of differentiation for a tactical war game, is that you want to have really strongly differentiated militaries. It's an army. What they've chosen to do with a war game is focus on chaplains, which the North has throughout. It's not just the Northern Lights Army that does that. All of the Northern armies have religious chaplains and that sort of thing. The staff that they use is a Dorothean staff, which is a monastic sect of revisionism. Not necessarily militaristic, but it's a martial weapon. And then that's a personal weapon. It's something that you see someone walking around with, a staff with two blades on it. And it's not written there in the books as to what that staff is about necessarily, but it's a very unwieldy weapon just because it's a very unwieldy weapon. Look at the thing. So that seems to be the point. The point is that it is a weapon, but it is not easy to use, and therefore is only used when the necessity requires it. And they have these weapons gear-sized, and gears will walk around with these massive weapons. The NLA, the Northern Lights Army, is not something that is going to go out of its way to go screaming and charge into glorious melee. They're not interested in that. The Dorothean aspect is, you consider almost like a Shaolin monk, religious figure. And that's how they've adopted that into the chaplains, I suppose. Again, that's just me riffing on what I know about the setting. All we know is that these are chaplains, and they use the Dorothean staff and the Dorothean martial arts.
I mean, from a modeling perspective, if anything, I think that's a sweet idea to give a gear this giant staff to wield around with blades on it. Like it's a cool modeling thing to do.
Yeah, I would use them as an honor guard for a commander or something like that. I think that would be a super sweet modeling thing. But the actual character of the army, if you want to be close to what the lore suggests, will be a fairly traditional sort of army. They follow fairly close to the Northern Guard doctrine.
Yeah. And at this point, I think we're running pretty good on time. I think I think we basically covered all the general stuff we need to with the faction. Do you guys have any other lore input you want to put in? We will be talking a bit about the chassis when we go over the tabletop. But as far as the lore goes, do you guys have anything else you want to add real quick before we kind of move on to more of the tabletop side?
I want to tell you a story. Story time, okay?
Story time with Grandpa Colin.
Story time, that's right. Story time. Very quick one. It's about the 74th Nova Red Riders. I wanted just as an example of what a Northern regiment is like. And not just Northern, but any Terra Novan regiment is going to be as storied as this. The Nova Red Riders are one of the featured regiments of heavy gear. In fact, they are the poster boys. If you see any pictures of a Northern gear that are tan with a red piece of armor on them, like a plate that's been painted red, that's from the Nova Red.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yes, and that's been adopted into kind of the general Northern thing, but that's the Nova Red Riders. And the story of how they came to be what they are now is an interesting one. They were formed during the Sandstorm strikes. So that's before the Judas Syndrome, before the War of the Alliance. One of the original kind of founding, they came out from the St. Vincent's Wars. And they were reformed as a mash of a bunch of other regiments, and they became the Nova Riders. They were called the Nova Riders at the time. Excuse me. Anyways, the Nova Riders, they served with distinction. They did their thing. They were focused on heavier vehicles and things like that. At the time, it was like bears and razorbacks. That was like the heavy, big, beefy gears. But again, mostly hunters, because most regiments on Terra Nova are GP. Like they have 50% of their number to 70% of their number are just hunters or Jagers or things like that. During the Interpolar War, not the Interpolar War, during the War of the Alliance is where things get really interesting for them, and where they really started serving with a distinction, because before then, they were a good regiment, but they were just a regiment. The CEF lands and pushes out into this massive salient. They just push until it looks like everything is breaking. At that worst point, when the North is almost ready to break, the Nova Red Riders at the time, just the Nova Riders, had lost some pretty significant casualties, and they were undergoing a bit of a reformation of their internal structure, their companies, because they'd lost enough that they basically retired the Alpha Company, the first company, which is about 60 gears. And they were getting brand new vehicles shipped in from the North. And we're talking the Grizzlies. There's some Kodiaks in there, like the good stuff, the new stuff. In many cases, the Kodiak was brand new at this point. And they were getting some of these. So they're like, this is going to be our Alpha Company. It's going to be great. We're going to actually take out some of these hover tanks. We're going to hold the line. And just as they were pulling up into the Maglev station south of the Western Frontier Protectorate, where they were basically pushed right up against the mountains, the CEF attacks and pushes right into where the 74th and the rest of their brigade are trying to defend that Maglev line that is keeping the entire northern defensive line alive. That Maglev line is incredibly important to the defense because it's the only way they can quickly get resources up and down. So the 74th is losing. They're getting pushed back. The entire brigade is getting pushed back, and they know they have to retreat. They're going to retreat closer to the Maglev line, but they need time. If they don't get that time, the entire brigade is going to crumple. The CF will break through, and they'll be into the UMF. And they'll break through, and they'll take out the Western Frontier. They'll be in the UMF, and the North will be invaded. So all of the pilots of Alpha Company, these brand new gears, basically go out, get their gears, come racing back in these brand new gears who are so new, they still have their red primer coat. They haven't been painted camo. And the Alpha Company goes out and takes the entire CEF division in the face. They're destroyed to a man, but it buys enough time for the brigade to pull back and reform into a cohesive battle line.
Dang.
So from that point, the regiment is renamed. They've become the Nova Red Riders. Their symbol, which is a star that is being held in the fist of a gear, has a little red blood drop that's put into it to represent the sacrifice of the Alpha Company. All of the gears from that point on paint one of the panels of their armor the same red primer color as the other gears in the Alpha Company that was destroyed. And they never reformed Alpha Company. They start with Beta. And they still have their 4 companies, but they just, I think it's Epsilon, might be Gamma, I don't know. But yeah, so that's the kind of level of history that you see with heavy gear regiments. They tend to be very storied. They have personal things, like the Duelist is I think the Grizzly was actually rebuilt from one of the destroyed Grizzlies during that attack. But it's painted fully red, just like the original Alpha Company was. Other than that, it's a stock Grizzly, and that's their regimental Duelist. And it's connected back to this history of what that regiment has done. So that's the kind of stuff that you see with heavy gear regiments. And that's what you should be building for yours.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that's a great story because you can add a lot of character to your gears that a lot of people don't even think of. And I think that's a big part of the game is the narrative side, and to be able to relate to your models like that. I think that's a great story, especially for the North. Yeah, I didn't even heard of that, and just hearing it now is just, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's one of like every one of the named regiments has stories like that.
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and just take a quick break for a second, and we'll just be right back. So yeah, now we're going to get into the tactical side, the tabletop version. So I think the first thing we can probably talk about is the models themselves. Gene, Colin, I think both of you can agree. North has a more boxy feel to them generally. I don't know if there's anything more to really describe as far as the way they look. Most of their heads have a single lens, very kind of sharpy, boxy angles. Anything like on the model themselves that's very unique compared to like maybe other factions that you can kind of point out?
What I can say is that the boxy look of the North, like I said, that is exactly its character. They're defined by flat, angular panels. Something that a lot of people miss with heavy gears is they have something called a head-in-head design. The head of a heavy gear is removable, and there's a little dome underneath of it. And the pilot's head is actually inside the head of the gear. That's where their head is. Every gear has an explosive front plate behind its eyepieces. So if the sensors fail and the gear goes blind, you can actually blow off the front of the face, and there's a little panel that you can look out. So you can actually look out and see what you're doing. And that's right. Absolutely. Also, incidentally, the angular head of most gears in the North is actually an armored hat, and beneath it is a smooth dome.
Oh, interesting.
If you look at the old artwork for hunters and things like that, they're rounded. And then later on, they're given this kind of angular armored piece on top.
Yeah. And actually, I want to get your guys' opinion on this.
Sure.
So they switched over to plastic with the plastic starter set. Do you think the Northern models still retain that kind of OG appearance, just more newer, still boxy? What's your guys' kind of view on the newer plastic sculpts, if it still retains the same hunter or the same old feel?
What do you think?
Personally, I think that they still retain the same boxy, angular look. It's my like the North and the South still retain the flavor and the plastics, and I love that.
Yeah, I agree with you. They still maintain the differences. They were the first plastics that DreamPod 9 have done. So they're not quite as good as the follow-ups. And that's just...
Oh, for sure.
But I find that if you're going to do the plastics, which are, like I said, they're good. I like them. And I'm using them. You have to chop them up a little bit and give them a little more dynamic posing, because that's what I miss from the metals. The size is fine, the detail is fine. I miss the kind of dynamic poses that Philippe made.
Dynamism, yeah, I get that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my number one complaint with the plastics is they all, if you assemble them per the sprue, then they're all just standing there.
Yeah, they're all just very square, and they're blocky, so I guess square is the right way to describe them. But at the same time, they're plastics. So they're really easy to chop up and manipulate and move around.
Oh yeah, sure. Like even with the Peace River and the new cool stuff I got, it wasn't that hard to change up the pose. And I usually didn't change up the legs and some of the poses. And I didn't even need to chop up anything. As long as you just pose it right and you use the side armor panels to hide some of the gaps. I mean, it's super easy.
Yes.
Yeah. You have a lot of
the hip joint for North and South models is different. And it did a little more work to actually get them to the place you want them to be. But it's not that hard, and they're plastic. It's just plastic glue and a little bit of patience and a little bit of putty, and that's it. And they look good. I haven't put together all of my North. I have another 2 sets of plastic army to go with my ridiculous pile of metals. I used to play much like the army size between the old versions of the game and the new version of the game. They tend to be a little different. Part of that is because I knew the old system so well. I used to field about a reinforced section, so 25, 30 miniatures.
Wow.
Which is Blitz tends to be about half that.
Yeah, it's generally, it's generally about, 15, 12 models, which is good for beginners. And I think it still resembles the game very well because most of the fighting are skirmishes, right? I think Blitz resembles that with about 15 gears generally.
The section is a very strong unit of the regiment. You're going to have a GP section, you're going to have a GP squad, you're going to have a fire support squad, you're going to have a strike squad or whatever. Yeah. So enough that they can mutually support one another as they go. Yeah, absolutely.
And with the simplification of a lot of the rules in 3.0 and the fact that you can play 30 plus models, it's just an increase in point size at that point, right? I think the DreamCon 9 just want to make it easier for new players to get in, and the size is perfect, right? It still retains that skirmish level that you want, but you can go up to 30 plus models. You can play at 300 threat value or points if you're new coming to Heavy Gear Blitz. So as far as how we want to do the tactical sense, I'm going to be naming off. So how the units work in Heavy Gear, when you're looking at the roster, if you are new, you can just hop on Gear Grinder, which is a free third-party website that you can build lists and stuff off of. You can also just hop on cards. Download all the cards. You can hop on the forums, and they also have all the units up there as well. I'm going to be naming off the main units. Colin, if you have any lore details about it, that you want to mention, we can go ahead and do that. I'm not going to be naming off every profile because how the Gear Grinder works is that generally you have, let's say, the Hunter, and then for each loadout that you have, which is usually a couple different weapons or maybe some traits added onto it, the name will change. But I'm not going to go over each one. I think we'll mention some of the more common ones you'll see. And the Hunter, I'm going to name some of the more unique Hunter variants because there's a lot. We can all agree that there's a lot of different profiles for the Hunter variants wise. So,
oh Lord, many.
Yeah. It is the general purpose.
And we already touched on how the North kind of plays. They're more specialized. I would say they have, just from looking at the discourse and people's opinions, they have a more abundance of direct weapons. They don't have as many indirect weapons. Not saying that they can't do it, but generally they have more direct weapons. And obviously we kind of discussed that they have a lot.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's interesting how that happened, because that was more just due to a change in the rules than it was to anything else.
Yeah.
The Norgard, again, they tend to have very kind of short range in their battle line, but they do rely quite a bit on artillery.
Yeah.
And the Grizzly is at least according to the setting, is the best general field support platform on Terra Nova. There is nothing better than that. Whereas on the tabletop, just due to the nature of how the game changed and became living rulebook and stuff like that, the Cobra is currently a little bit, because of the variant choices, a little bit better. But again,
and it could, to be honest, the North could just have better artillery pieces, but maybe just not as many, and that could be another thing as well. Because when you look at the South, which we'll get into next episode, they have a lot of indirect ways of fighting you.
Oh, believe me, I know perfectly well how many things. Oh man, I'm getting flashbacks here.
And we discussed that they have a lot of climb profiles generally, which is cool from a lore perspective. It's great, and then also on the tabletop, climb is actually really good. It's
very useful.
It's very useful because it's used to get elevation, which in the game you get a bonus modifier. I think that's honestly why you use it a lot, for that climb ability, or just to get into some hard spots that to get line of sight on things. It's just a useful trait. So we can go ahead and start with the
No, so very useful. Like you said, getting into elevated terrain.
Absolutely.
Or hilariously, people don't think about this very often. Make an urban table sometime. Use climb.
Yep.
Get that elevation on your on buildings.
Yep. It's fun where you can sneak out from, like, cling to the side of a building, sneak out the side, take a shot, pop back in, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And we discussed that their color scheme, at least portrayed in a lot of the boxes and stuff, is that tan color with the red. You can, there's a ton of, you can look in the books. We don't have to really discuss it, but there's a ton of different color schemes that you can go with for the North, like camo schemes, even. Like they have a lot. It's like your modern military, right? You can switch up the camo.
Specifically what they do, they paint their vehicles according to the environment that they're going into.
Yeah.
But of course, at the same time, you're selling a military or a miniature line, so you want to have distinguishing colors between different things so you can easily see them apart, because they can look the same if you have them all painted the same color. So, but
what is there anything else? So the sublist will kind of change, like, drastically how an army is performed, but from a general, like, roster point of view, is there anything else you guys can think of that's very unique to the North? Yeah, just the North roster that makes it different than the South, because a lot of new players will come in and be like, the South and the North seem very similar. So
they do. I don't know if you have anything you want to say on that.
No, I'm more of the South general.
Okay,
so
fair
go
enough.
right ahead.
The North, first of all, the differences between North and South aren't as big as the differences between regiments. Have strong individual character. Some regiments are just, we're a pure recon regiment. We just do recon gears and hunters, and that's it. Others will have big, heavy things. The North, when it comes to what it does better than anything, I would say that the Cheetah Grizzly combo of fire support is very strong. It doesn't play out as strong as it was before, but the Cheetah is an excellent target designation platform and general recon platform, and the Grizzly is an excellent fire support platform, and they are the perennial example of how to do indirect fire, and is, in fact, that's basically how the North deals with hard spots. That battle line of hunters rolls up, they see something nasty, Cheetah's out there tagging it, Grizzly's bombing it, and then the North continues to push at the same time.
And when we get to the Cheetah on the roster, there's I can see why the Cheetah Grizzly combo just like works smoothly. Oh my gosh, it's nuts. So yeah, we can. I guess we can start with the first profile, right? So the Hunter, which is your basic gear.
The Hunter Mark III is what this is. There were two other Hunters before this. This is the Mark III.
Okay, that's actually really good to know. So the basic point threat value of the Hunter is 6 threat value. It can change over time, but generally it's going to stay the same. And it's a really cheap gear compared to some other factions. I think the Warrior is like 7 points, where you get a bit more upgrades. Your average gear has a 6 movement. The whole structure, if you see me you'll probably hear me say 4.2 or 3.3. The first number is the hull. The second number is the structure of it. It's a 4.2, which is your pretty average gear. It has one action, gunnery skill of a 4-up, piloting skill of a 4-up, as an electronic warfare skill of a 4-up. And it comes with your basic stuff, a light autocannon, a light rocket pack, the light anti-personal grenade launcher. What makes the Hunter different, which we can talk about, is the light Panzerfaust and the light vibro blade. So that's your basic gear stat. The one thing I see that's different about is the Panzerfaust. Do you use that a lot? Do you see?
I like them. I like that. That's something they added with Living Rulebook. I quite like it. The Hunter's interesting for LRB in that it is as close as you can get to being unchanged from its original stats back in Tactical as you can get. It is very similar. It's a very similar character. The damage mechanics mean that it behaves differently on the table, but it's about as close as you can get to that original vehicle. And it's good because that's the anchor from which the rest of Living Rulebook was designed. It was the Hunter and the Yager. The Panzerfaust make it so that it is a very good general purpose. It has tools for basically every problem. It can handle basically anything. They're really good.
Yeah, because it's AP2. So like it's great because if you're fighting against a high armor target, you use a Panzerfaust, and then if you're fighting against just regular armored folk, you just use a light autocannon. And they have some different variations. Some of the names are pretty cool. They have a hunter gear called a Mountain Hunter, which has the climb trait basically. They have a Headhunter, which is it has all the same type of profiles with the regular hunter, but it comes with comms. And I think it might have, let me double check. It might have a higher electronic warfare. It does. So it has a 5+ electronic warfare. And then you also have the Para Hunter, which is basically just a hunter with airdrop. And airdrop in the game is good because it gives you a 12-inch bonus to your deployment zone currently. You have the Armored Hunter, which is just one extra armor generally. It's a bit slower. And you have the Stripped Down Hunter, which is very interesting. I've never seen I don't know if they have stripped down Jaegers in the South. Is that just a unique thing with the Hunter, a stripped down version of it?
It's actually kind of interesting. I found that one. Sorry, you were going to say something?
No, I was going to say South also has stripped down Jaegers.
Yep. It's interesting because the stripped down versions of the vehicles were basically something that the old modeler, Philippe Leclerc, decided he wanted to do for fun. He thought it would be fun to make something with its armor panels removed. Because there's the old Hunter Recon did that. It removed some of its armor panels. And that has now been renamed to the Stripped Down Hunter. And it's
I never even heard of a Stripped Down Hunter till I think it was on the Discord, and Adam from the Dice of Hyde cast, like he posted up his Stripped Down Hunter, and I was like, oh, that's what they look like with the padded look to them.
You just take some of the armor panels off and put on ballistic cloth instead. Apparently used by places like the Western Frontier Protectorates, like they don't have the armor panels left to actually fix them up, so they just put on some ballistic cloth and kick you out the door. Not a vehicle I'd want to go out in, but I guess, but they are a little quicker, at least in the lore. They're faster, and that means that if you can't afford to get a proper recon gear, a Stripped Down Hunter will do the job for you.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the last one to note that I see here is the XMG Hunter, which to me seems like a close combat gear. It has Brawler 1, it has a shield. Like it seems more of a CC.
The XMG has quite the history behind it. When was that? That was in 1932-34. The XMG was a prototype that was designed as be like the next generation of Hunter. Better than the Hunter in every way. Bigger gun, more armor, better weapons, better communication, more agile, just awesome gear. And it was a success, but it was too expensive to make a production version of it. So instead they toned it down a little bit, and that was the production version. Yeah, it had what flaws did this thing have? It had a fragile chassis. It kept on cracking and overheating. So the engine would constantly overheat. But it had stuff like an emergency medical system built into the crew support system. And it had a massive ram plate on the front and reinforced structure and all kinds of nonsense stuff. It was a super just tanky vehicle. But yeah, it didn't quite live up to the hype, so they had to tone it down a little bit. I will say there's one more gear in there. There's one more very important hunter that you got to mention, and it's the Assault Hunter. If you want the traditional Northern Guard unit, it is Head Hunter, Assault Hunter. And that will be an excellent low-cost way to take and hold an area. If you want to hold an objective or something of that nature, that's great. If you want something that can push into the enemy and make it terrified when it gets close, that's your unit right there.
Yeah. Because I want to know what, as far as like when you use hunters, how do you usually like use hunters? What are some big play styles that you see with hunters in lists? What is there any? They seem like the basic gear, and they have a lot of options, and I feel like that's what they generally offer you is a cheap general. They have a lot of options in their profiles. So like, how do you use the hunter?
The way I use them now, first of all, I should say I play large size games. We usually play about 300 points is what we play.
Yeah.
So they tend to be fairly large games. I will usually field maybe 2 if I can get away with a third. I like fielding a lot of general purpose. So I will try and field as many GP basic Northern Guard squads as I can in basically that format. I often like giving putting a Mac in there, just a little bit more punch. If I have something else in there, then definitely I have no problems changing the outfit for gears. But in general, I like taking those 3 units and, just as I described, marching them slowly forward, taking best advantage of cover as they can, obviously, but slowly moving them forward and then using Grizzlies. I tend to play fairly Grizzly heavy. Big surprise. Nova Red Rider. Yeah, big chunky guys. But yeah, as they move forward, I will have the Grizzlies basically acting as problem solvers and deterrent. Yep. But it's the hunters that are doing most of the work in pouring out all the firepower and making a slow push on the enemy as they move forward. It worked incredibly well in tactical. It worked quite well in Old Blitz. It doesn't work quite as well in the new version of the game because just the way the armor versus damage plays out completely differently. But if you mix in a little bit of bazooka or grenade launcher or something like that, or you just get those Grizzlies in there a little closer, it works okay. It works pretty good.
Yeah, because I just get that aspect that, like what you said, you can run just a full combat groups of them just because they're a lot cheaper. They're generally cheaper than other combat groups. Or if you're maybe like a point or 2 over on your points limit, generally you can just find the same replacement with the hunter for most of the gears.
Usually, and that's actually the other Northern Squadron profiles tend to follow the idea of let's throw some hunter in there just in case, because you tend to have very well-trained, like specialized specialists. They usually come with a couple hunters. So for example, your average fire support squad is going to be 2 Grizzlies, 2 hunters, and then either a Jaguar or a headhunter. And that's your fire support squad. Whereas if you're doing recon, it's going to be 2 cheetahs, 2 hunters, and then maybe a white cat, maybe a headhunter, maybe a Jaguar, something like that. So you tend to see hunters all over the place. To
just keep buying them because you're always gonna find room for them.
You will never have a problem with having too many hunters. Hunters are always useful.
Yeah, and that's what I get the feeling of. I'm like, you can easily run a bunch of hunters and not feel like you're downgrading. So, and speaking of Jaguars, let's go into our first like mammal naming profile. Yeah, and this is following too with a lot of the other factions, whereas you're more elite base gear. Now your base cost is 11 points opposed to your hunter, which is 6. It has a higher movement of 7 instead of 6, so it's 7 inches. Its armor is 7. Oh, I didn't mention it, but the hunter armor is 6.
Yeah.
And The Jaguar has a 1 higher armor. It's a 3-3, so it's a bit easier to cripple, but that's generally what you find with more elite stuff. 1 action still, has a gunnery and piloting skill of 3+, so 1 better, and it has a electronics warfare of a 5+, and depending on what upgrades you can increase that electronics warfare. Its base loadout comes with a medium autocannon, light rocket pack, anti-personal grenade launcher. It's the light version, a light vibro blade, and it comes with the arms trait, like most gears, and the agile and airdrop. I think the agile is, I don't remember the other kind of elite drop troops having agile, because I think that is really good to have.
It is.
It is. And all the variants have the agile with a 3+ piloting. So that's going to save your butt so many times.
Absolutely.
Yes. And if you're new, agile is so good because it basically stops. So generally when you have an MOS of 0, you have a chance of doing 1 damage. But then the agile just ignores that.
Yep. Completely negates that marginal hit chance.
Yeah. And that marginal hit happens more often than you'd think.
Really does.
Really does.
Especially since you're a 3-3, you're going to be attritioned by marginal hits.
Yes.
But that agile is going to just completely save your bacon so many times.
The Jaguar has always been a little bit of a lightweight. If you compare it with the Southern Mamba or other commando vehicles, it's a little less armor. It feels a little bit more like you're in a flying eggshell, but it makes up for it by just being very good at its job. Again, it is a specialist. It does nothing except its commando missions. And unfortunately, that means that it's a little lightly armored by comparison. So it is a little more fragile.
And this is when, I assume when you're building a squad of them, that, where you add in the airdrop hunters in just to save points.
Yes, absolutely. And those hunters, again, will also provide you with something a little bit more sturdy. The only issue is you have to make sure they keep up. Now, in LRB as it is right now, that's an extra inch, so that's not that big a deal. But it can be at points. And so you basically just have to get a feel for what you're doing. Jaguars and hunters get along quite nicely. Cheetahs and jaguars play very nicely together, but you are playing with fire because they're super fragile and they will explode the moment a stiff breeze hits them. But if you can get them into the right place at the right time, they will just melt people. They will do really well.
And as far as the different variants, you have the Thunder Jaguar, which is your comms with a better electronic warfare skill. You have your, I believe they're called is it SETCOM? Is that how you pronounce it? So yeah, and this is where you get the ECCM and the SATUP usually, or sensors depending on which loadout you take, and they still retain the EW of a 4+. What type of loadouts do you see with the Jaguars that you see pop up, Colin?
There aren't a ton of players for the North in my group, and again, I haven't had a chance to play too much third. But what I've seen, obviously, third being the age of COVID.
No one. This is basically all just coming from theory and your experience in the past, right?
Yeah. What you're seeing with Jaguars, they tend to operate on their own in a way that most Northern gears don't, which means they have to have a little bit more self-sufficiency, which means they have to avoid direct engagement where possible. You don't throw them into the heart of the enemy. You picket the corners. You try and pull the enemy away from their defensive positions by providing feints and tempting them with kind of vulnerable spots that they might attack, things like that. So you're looking at stuff like you're going to need some plain old Jaguars because you want to have some of those autocannons out there. You're going to need some sort of a section commander. Whether you go for the actual SETCOM with the ECCM or not depends on how much you're worried about electronics. In general, I find that you don't really need to. Just go for direct fire weaponry, keep moving fast. Don't worry too much about ECM as long as you're not getting jammed. I quite like the Fire Jaguar. I think the Fire Jag is awesome. It pours out a stupid amount of firepower, and especially with Living Rulebook, You can play a statistics game. It's not much fun. I don't like it, but it is effective, statistically effective to just make your enemy roll a bunch of defensive dice. And the Fire Jag will make you do that because it has a lot of rocket behind it.
Oh yeah, because it has a medium rocket pack, and it's Link as well, which Link is that's an extra die, so that's super good. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, my personal favorite for the Jaguar is Pathfinder with the heavy rifle. Is that one? Because I really like the sniper game, and because they don't want to be in their enemy's face anyways, keeping them away as a harassing unit makes them excellent choices for that. They're very good.
And the fact that you can airdrop, even though you don't necessarily want to be closer, the fact is that you have a lot more of the board that you can deploy in, that you can get the right angle on someone. Exactly.
And if you want to go apply fist to face with your Jaguars, strike Jags and strike Cheetahs and toss them in there, and they will do quite well. I would put a White Cat in with that unit. I really like White Cats. I think they're awesome.
Speaking of White Cats, or actually not cats.
Further that discussion.
Yeah.
A Jaguar, because of its piloting, is going to be, I know this is anti-North doctrine, but they do really well in melee because that 3+ is going to get you way better MOSs.
If there's anything that I say go for the melee with, it's a Jaguar.
Yeah.
Go for that. It's not really in there right now, but the Nemesis Jaguar. Get in there with that.
It's going to love being in melee.
Yep. It's going to do quite well with that. And if you're going to make a duelist, a Jaguar is an excellent choice because they have a really good platform to go from, a little bit lightweight. But if you have a duelist in there, they're probably going to be able to handle that. You go with that Southern Special with that big old sword. And that is one, because the North made the Southern Special. The Jaguar, the Nemesis Jaguar Southern Special, which was a specialized kind of Jaguar. The Nemesis Jag has improved actuators. It's incredibly fast. It's incredibly agile. And they made the Southern Special specifically to get into sword duels with iguanas and mambas. It is specifically to stab things with a giant viper. And that is, if you want to do that, is super cool. And it is completely conformant with the lore. It is entirely what the North did because they wanted to flex on the South and say, we can do this too. And they also did it because they thought if they can do that, then they might be able to avoid some of the more gruesome attritional warfare that they've been seeing. So yeah, Southern Special. That's super cool.
That's awesome. So cool. Yeah, let's move on to the Tiger. I think this is probably one of my favorites. So the Tiger comes at 9 points, so it's about 3 more than your Hunter. It has your same movement skill of 6. It has an armor 7, similar to the Jaguar. It has a 4-2, so it's a bit tougher, so you don't not gains crippled as much. It has a 3 gunnery skill and a 3 piloting skill with a 6-up electronic warfare. Its base loadout is a medium autocannon with a medium rocket pack, which you usually see the anti-personnel grenade launcher, and a light close combat weapon. I believe that's what the LCW is. Yep.
Yeah.
Which is I think the light close combat weapon is a bit better than the Vibro Blade. I'm pretty sure. I need to double check on the stats.
Basically, just a big old reinforced fist.
Yep. Yeah. When I see this, I see just a better version of a Hunter generally, just with the better armor, better gunnery skill, and piloting skill. I don't know what specific loadouts that you see because it doesn't have that many. It has is a Sabertooth a version of the Tiger, or is that its own thing?
Okay. Yeah, it's the command variant, basically.
Which I think is a cool name for
it is. It's a cool looking gear too. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that, because I do have a bit to say about the Tiger. I love it. It's great.
Gene, do you have anything to say when you?
Besides the fact that this is your Hunter dialed up to 11.
Kind of. Yeah. It's the predecessor to the Jaguar is the Tiger.
Oh, interesting.
It was before the Jaguar came around. There was the Hunter, and then the Tiger was the first attempt to make a special forces gear. This was not designed to be a general purpose gear. It was designed to go out and do what the Jaguar does: go and beat people up, and take their lunch money. And it was incredibly good and stuck around as the kind of the northern commando vehicle of the UMF for quite some time, and it's still considered to be a emblematic gear for the UMF. They still consider it to be great, and you still see a lot of Tigers there for that reason. Of course, the Jaguar eventually came out and outclassed the Tiger, but there's an interesting sort of, it doesn't exist currently in living rulebook, but I can tell you in the previous versions of the rules, the Tiger sat at a sweet spot where it didn't move any faster than a hunter. It was basically had many of the characteristics of a hunter, but it was just tough enough that it could withstand the most ludicrous attacks and be relatively okay. It could take a full-on CEF hover tank charge and repel it, which is there is almost nothing that can do that.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, like the old hover tanks, like the new hover tanks, yeah, they're pretty tough. The old hover tanks are obscene.
Ridiculous.
Like I said, I have a pair of friends, and one plays North and one plays CEF, and the trade-off between those two, the interplay between them as they had this escalating conflict of like, first one brought a bunch of Grell, and then in order to kill all those Grell, the North player brought a Polar Grizzly with that big mortar that was able to just blat them all. So then they put them all the Grell in heavy armor. And so the Northern player decided that they were going to put biological warfare weapons, and that was the loadout for those Grizzlies. So those mortars were bombing them with virus bombs. And so they decided that they were going to put an NBC armor on the Grell. And there's this constant up and up and up and up of just these ludicrous attacks against one another. But the one thing that was a constant was Tiger squads as the GP squad, doing what hunters normally do, walking calmly up the middle of the line. And there was nothing that the CEF player could do to really stop that. The frames didn't have quite the damage output until they got too close, at which point they got torn apart by the medium autocannons. And the hover tanks didn't have the range, so they would have to dip in close. And if a hover tank dips in too close to a bunch of Tigers, the hover tank will probably survive and might even take out its target. But it's going to be so torn up that it's not going to be able to continue the operation. So Tigers are just an awesome brick of a unit. They're great. If you want to start your army by starting with a squad of Tigers and a Sabertooth, awesome start. Super good.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with that.
Cannot go wrong. Really good.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's definitely a not that much more expensive elite version of just a hunter. It doesn't have as many options, and that's the I guess the only downside I could see with the hunter is the fact that it doesn't have a lot of options. It has no way to airdrop. That's the point of the Tiger, right? It's supposed to be this more durable elite unit. So now we're going to get on probably to Colin's favorite, because he talks about this a lot during this episode, the cheetah. Yes. So it's 9 points for your base loadout. Gosh, I just looking at the stats for the cheetah is nuts. So it has a movement of 9 inches. It's a walker ground. It has an armor of 5, which is lower than your hunter. 3/3 for its health. 1 action for gunnery skill. A 3 up for piloting skill. 4 up for the electronic warfare skill. It comes with a pack gun, a rocket pack, which has a damage of 6 instead of 7, I believe. A light vibro blade. And then it has a lot of traits. Not a lot, but a decent amount. So it has agile, comms, ECM, ECCM, target designator, sensors, which are bumped up to 24 inches. Now the sensors and the ECM are aux, so I believe you get crippled, you lose the ECM and sensors. Yeah, that's just his base loadout, and it has a lot more in here, but it seems like a very good, not really skirmisher, like someone who just gets up in there and scans, forward observe something for the rest of your army.
Yeah, it is definitely your eyes and ears. Absolutely.
And they have some cool sub names like White Cat, Metal Cat. They have a Sniper Cheetah, which is pretty awesome. They have Paracheetahs, which have an airdrop, which I think is like nuts.
Yep.
So yeah, what can you really? They seem pretty simple, right? Like when you think of what their role is, I don't see what else you could use them for besides for observing.
They are forward observers. They are an electronics platform, which is very important for the current state of the game. You can use them for providing electronics to, for example, we were talking about squads of Jaguars and things like that. That will be an excellent platform for giving ECM in that kind of bubble, which will definitely improve the length of life for any Jaguars in that squad.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
I think the White Cat is actually pretty worth its points because it comes with an ECM plus, which from what I remember, I don't know if it's ECCM or ECM plus. ECM plus always has the defensive bubble up, so you don't have to worry about spending action to do it.
Long been considered basically the best ECM in the game. There's the Chatterbox in the south, which is very much its competitor, and I've seen many games that just ended up being electronics duels between the two of them because they are very, very good. As for different variants, there are actually a pretty good number of variants. One thing that you try to avoid with cheetahs is getting into any close range fight in general. So you'll see a lot of long range stuff, but there's
the sniper cheetah or something. Yeah.
There's like go ahead.
Oh no, it's just because of that armor 5, dude. If something looks at them, they're toast.
So they do take a lot of babysitting. They take a lot of babysitting. You have to be careful with them. They're very good for if you need something at one part of the battlefield right now. Say you need air, anti-air, getting something with anti-air out there, super good. The air claw is what that's called. It's a striking cheetah of various kinds. The strike cheetah is the one with the rapid fire bazooka. That one kind of has a little story to it. Nothing too huge, but the reason why the strike cheetah, it used to be the same armor as an iguana, which at that point was basically a hunter. It used to have much better armor, but that was because of a typo. It was supposed to have really crappy armor like the rest of them, but there was a typo that gave it good armor, and they just decided, well, okay, that's what it is now. So it has this reputation of being an ungodly beast of a machine. Now at this point, it's basically it's just another cheetah at this point. But I still really like them because they have that reputation of just being
and the rapid bazooka, they changed it a bit in 3.0. It's still the same thing. Instead of calling it the rapid fire, like a different type of weapon, they basically just put that it's a light bazooka that has burst 1, AP 1 instead of AP 2, and split 2. So and that perfectly resembles the rapid fire of that weapon.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna go ahead.
I was just gonna say that the RFB, what it is properly, it's basically an infantry bazooka. It's just a gigantic infantry bazooka that rapid fires. That's what that is. Yeah, and so for every time you pull the trigger is 10 bazooka rounds. So yeah, they're gross. They're really gross.
Next on the list, we have the leopard, which is your, I would say besides your hunter, the first climber we see. So it's a 7 movement speed, which is a bit faster. Armor 6, a 3/3, 1 action, 4+ gunnery skill, 3+ piloting skill, 6+ EW, medium autocannon, an LFC, which I think is a light frag cannon, light rocket pack, MHG, MSG, and just a regular close combat weapon. It has agile, airdrop, and the climber ability. It seems like a weird mix between, I don't even know what to describe a leopard. What's your best? I can't. I'm looking at the stat and I'm just like trying to see what's its big thing about it.
Yeah, it doesn't really have one. It's a very new model, and it's not actually part of the lore.
It seems like they're trying to combine different. Yeah, it seems like they're trying to combine different, like a lot of different weapons together. Because I see it has a lot of weapons. It still airdrops. It's a light gear that climbs. So it's interesting. I don't know what. I mean, you still have use for it, but I'm just trying to think of what type of scenarios would it be good in.
It seems to me like what they're designing with this is a gear that they can drop into really rough terrain, probably some of the Badlands mountain ranges, and just let it do its thing there and go off on a general purpose. It can handle most situations, almost like a Jaguar would be, but specialized to that particular type of terrain.
Well, on the tabletop, it at a glance, it's going to be really geared towards anti-tank duty.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes
that
sense.
spike gun and that close combat weapon, like it's
which is a little odd, but ambush at close range in tight quarters. It seems to be what it is.
Awesome. So now we have the ferret, which is, I believe is that the favorite butt wheel that everyone loves?
That is the original butt wheel.
Yep, original butt wheel.
Yep.
It's pretty cheap. It's 6 points. It's very similar to a cheetah in a lot of regards. So it has the 9-inch movement speed. It has the armor 4, which is awful. It's 3/3, 1 action, a 5-up gunnery skill, which is a lot worse. It has a 3 piloting skill. It has a 4-up EW. Comes with a pack gun, rocket pack, damage 6, like the cheetah, vibro blade. Comes with arms, brawler with a -1, so it gets worse in CC. Comms, ECCM. It has a sensors of 36 inches, which is really freaking high, and a target designator. So I feel like this is your very. So the cheetah seems like has more like dual purpose roles and stuff like that. I feel like the ferret is very specific on its job, which is forward observing at that 36 inch.
Oh yeah, this is your spotter extraordinaire.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's an interesting story, the ferret, because it was designed as a competitor to the cheetah, and it lost out and didn't, because the military, it was far from perfect design. It wasn't great. It's really strange, and it actually showed up before the cheetah did. As soon as the cheetah showed up, the ferret was like considered basically obsolete, but it is incredibly popular in the civilian market. So I want you to imagine biker gangs, but they're ferrets. Ferret gangs bombing around in the woods doing stuff. That's what the ferret's about. It's very popular for that reason, because they're so fast, they're so light, they're so small, and they tend to have kind of an easier movement mechanism because they don't have to have powered wheels on their feet. They just have the big butt wheel. So yeah, they're very interesting from a lore perspective, because they're trying to compete in the same niche as the cheetah. They don't quite get there, but they have their own little specialization of being electronics. And on the tabletop, they're just a lot of fun.
Yeah. And they have, I assume, the weasel and the black cat. Are they the same model, just different variants? I'm trying to.
Weasel's completely different. Weasel and Tattletale they have a very similar chassis to the ferret. They don't have the butt wheel. They were actually made by Kamuri Gear, which is the same company that makes the ferret. So they're both designed by the same company. They look similar. The weasel was designed to be a classic electronic warfare instead of being the more general recon of the ferret.
Because I'm looking at the stats now. It's basically the same thing as a ferret. It has one inch less of movement. It has a slightly worse piloting skill. It has a 3+ electronics warfare skill, which I think is why you see it. And it comes with ECM plus, ECCM, SAT-ups, and sensors 36, and also VET, which is pretty good because you get a skill point from that. Yeah. So I think it exactly what you said. It's very skewed toward, probably you can still forward observe, but it's more, like you said, it's more for that ECM electronics warfare.
Yeah, it is an excellent choice for that. It is an excellent battlefield commander thing. I think that's where the veteran thing comes from. Interesting story. I don't know if you guys ever played the Heavy Gear 2 video game.
Negative.
My group.
I've seen the cutscenes. Does it have a weasel in there?
Yeah, you can play. Well, it's not. You can't play that in the campaign. You play Black Talons. But the secret of that game is that it has a multiplayer. And it's like a 5 versus 5. Here's a map. Try and control points. And you're all gears. I think it can do up to 16 players, something like that. Might even be more. But my group used to play that game quite a bit. And I always piloted a weasel or a tattletale. They were terrible. You do not fight anything in that. You have a light autocannon. You're not maneuverable. You got no rockets. You're a piece of trash, but you can see everything. And so all I would do is I would just sit in the back and I would dodge around to avoid getting sniped. And I would be telling people, okay, I see these guys. They're coming around this side. So we need 2 people to go over that way, get the Razorback over there. I played the actual Battlefield Commander from a Weasel, and it worked super well.
Hilarious.
Oh, yeah. No, they're goofy little gears. They're just silly looking little things, but they really do have an excellent electronics package. Really, really strong.
Next, we got the Black Hat, which I'm starting to notice, like, getting into more of the stealthy stuff. And it only has 2 profiles, but the Black Hat is a 9-inch. It has an armor of 5, which is a bit higher than the Weasel. It's a 3/3 still, 4-up gunnery skill, 3-up piloting, 4-up electronics warfare, pack gun that has arm, and it has silent with this one, which is cool. Rocket pack, damage 6, fiber blade, agile, airdrop, as stealth, which is probably the big thing with it, vet, ECM plus, ECCM, target designator, and a sensors of 36 inches, which is not aux. So even if it gets crippled, you get to still use the sensors on it. And stealth, if you guys want to explain what stealth is, I think stealth is a pretty good role. Generally, it has to do with sensors, correct?
It's twofold. A, it impacts sensors, and B, it also helps you roll, or it helps you on the defense when you're getting shot. So it's going to shorten everybody's sensors to you by that, or to that specific model, and just cut it down by 8 inches. I think 8 inches.
I think 8 inches. Yeah.
Just automatically by being stealth. Yep. So if somebody trying to target designate you or spot you or whatever, boom, they're out of range.
Exactly. So the Black Cat and its cousin, the Black Claw, are actually cheetahs. They're based on the cheetah chassis. They've been modified. They were originally designed near the end of the War of the Alliance, and they were designed basically to help crack that egg and get in there and do that. Most of the missions that they went on were shrouded in secrecy. They're still considered confidential, but they are considered like them and the Panther being the Jaguar version.
I was about to discuss that too. The Panther is the same thing, same stats. It has only 2 loadouts, but it's same thing. It has stealth and vet and a sensors of 24 inches.
Exactly. And they were all designed with this same motivation in mind, to finish off the CEF and get them surrendered and get them done.
That's cool.
They are considered to be scary. Their design is still held under heavy guard. If, for example, there is a unit of Black Cats and Black Claws and Panthers hanging around, they are kept under guard. Only certain technicians are allowed to work on them. They're very high stealth. They're scary vehicles, and they are treated as such.
Yeah. Like you said, it basically is the cheetah and the Jaguar, just with stealth and vet, and just like only 2 options.
Yes.
And I think they definitely have use in your army if you have the spare points, if you're running those loadouts. The next one we got is the Wildcat, which has a decent amount. So basically, it's another fast skirmisher. So it's 8 inches, armor 5, 3/3, 5-up gunnery skill, 4-up piloting skill, 6-up electronics warfare with the light autocannon, light rocket pack, medium viper blade with agile, brawler 1, comms, and arms. This kind of seems like a skirmisher close combat type of gear by the looks of it. It even has a Riot Master Wildcat.
Yeah. It's based on the Bobcat.
Yep, I see the Bobcat. Yeah, right here.
Yeah,
it's the same stats basically. So
yeah, basically this was the first true recon. Was that? This was the North's first specialized recon gear. Was the Bobcat, and the Wildcat is an evolution of that. It's the Wildcat's more of a trooper. I suppose. I guess I'm talking about both because the Wildcat was only like originally in the lore. The Wildcat was just mentioned in the description of the Bobcat. It was never really its own thing, but they're very related. And yeah, I can absolutely see that being more of a close combat or close in action sort of oriented model, and also a little bit more Western frontier.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It seems like it's for those players that definitely want to have that kind of like riot type of feel to their faction, just like police.
Yeah.
Or just or if you just want more CC in your faction, I mean,
basically
medium.
This is your answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So next we got is the koala. Sorry if this is taking long. We kind of knew the North was going to be a bit of a and I want to So sorry for the audience, we might actually have to split this up into 2 videos depending, or 2 separate podcasts for people. So the koala, which is another, I see people talk about the koala a lot. So it's a 6-inch movement, 7 armor, so it's a bit higher, 3/3, 1 action, 4+ gunnery skill, 5 up piloting skill, 6 up electronic warfare. Its base loadout is a heavy autocannon, medium frag cannon, medium rocket pack, which is linked, great, an HMG, MSG, arms, airdrop, and Brawler 1. I don't think the Brawler 1 really matters, but holy crap, the koala seems just like this little guy with a bunch of guns.
Yep, that is exactly what it is. The koala and all the drop bears, like the drop bear stuff, is, I think they're the Crazy Eights. Sounds about right. That was designed like it's interesting because those gears are specific to regiments. There are regiments that are doing that. I believe the koala is based on the Mad Dog. And it's not its own chassis. It's basically a modification of an existing chassis. And it was designed to be airdroppable and just drop in and punch stuff up. I'm pretty sure it's based on the Mad Dog and the bear, or the kind of the drop bears, is those things. But older vehicles that were refitted to be airdropped and go in and wreck stuff. It's not really Northern character, but that goes to show you just how much variance there is between regiments, because that's a regiment that is just purely airdrop. I've got a friend who has the 33rd Roving Guns, and they're just almost entirely Jaguars, a little bit of Cheetah, a little bit of Parahunter, but they all drop. And same sort of idea. So very cool design. I know the designer for them.
Oh.
Yeah. Good old John.
That's cool. Yeah. I like how connected the community is.
Yeah,
it seems like everyone knows each other.
Yeah.
Is the Dingo a version of the koala, or is that? I'm just looking at the stats. It basically looks like the same thing. I can go over it if it isn't.
Yeah.
Is it a variation of the koala?
I believe so.
Okay. So we can just go past that. Colin, I feel like the Grizzlies your favorite.
Grizzlies are definitely my favorite.
Yeah. So they're walker ground 5 inches, their armor 8. So this is where we're getting into the higher armor. 4/2, 1 action, a 4+ gunnery skill, 5 up piloting skill, and a 6 up EW. Comes with a heavy autocannon, pack gun, medium rocket pack linked, a MGM, HMG, light vibro blade, and it has arms and react plus, which is really good. So I can go ahead and let you just talk about the Grizzlies in general, because there's a decent amount of Grizzlies.
Grizzly is a very, it's considered to be the kind of classic Northern gear. It is a cooperation between two of the largest, I should say, Northern military corporations, Northco and Cheyenne Mechanics, basically Cheetah and Jaguar Hunter, blah, blah, blah. So it's a polar design. It's not just from a league, it's from the whole pole. It is large. It is designed to replace the bear. The bear is an older design. This one replaced it. Very similar to it, however. They're not that different to one another. This one is able to carry a larger loadout, which is why you start seeing the larger mortars and larger weapons to it. It
seems great. It's great. And it has the React Plus, which if you're new, React Plus is almost like a second action, but it's literally what it stands for reaction, right? So you get to have a free reaction shot every turn, which is very good.
Which is
for the price. I mean, what the Grizzly is 12 points. That's 2 hunters. But like, it's a really solid price point for how much extra you're getting.
Exactly.
Any like specific loadouts you really? I see a lot of Thunder Grizzlies.
I like just the plain old classic Grizzly. Call me boring. It is the classic. It is very strong, very powerful. It fits really well in with a bunch of hunters. If you're going more aggressive, the Grizzly Destroyer is always fun because you get that big old bazooka.
Yep.
And
heavy bazooka. Ooh.
That's right. But honestly, if you're going in that direction with that sort of assault thing, you're probably looking at Kodiaks as well. And Codys and Grizzlies in a group, pretty scary.
So I guess we can go into the Kodiak because that guy is
a beast.
Yep. So he's 20 points, which is a lot more than even a Grizzly. And I can see why. So it has a Walker and Ground of 5, Armor of 9, 4/2, 2 actions, 3+ gunnery skill, 5+ piloting, 6+ EW, an MPA. I think PA is what? That's a medium rocket pack, a light ATM, precise HMG, anti-personnel grenade launcher, medium vibro blade, and it has arms and vet. Holy crap. I can see why that thing is 20 points because vet, the extra gunnery skill, the extra arm, it just seems like a freaking beat stick with 2 actions.
Absolutely is. It was designed again at the end of the War of the Alliance. So Earth is they're starting to stop Earth. And one of the things that is actually the wall that stops their advance is the Kodiak. The story that I told before, the 74th, the Alpha Company had just received a whole bunch of heavy gears, and that was one of the first appearances of the Kodiak. So that's the legend of the Kodiak. It's the kind of gear that can just go toe-to-toe with hover tanks and take it. And on the tabletop, they can support, but they can do that. Yeah. They can totally do that. They're scary. There's also the King Cobra in the South, which fills the comparative role. It was designed in the same circumstances and does the same sort of thing. But they are the superstars of the North, is the Kodiak. Model of this is a Northern gear. This is the peak before you got to the Gear Striders and things like that.
Yeah.
But that's
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
And it seems good. I think if you're playing North, I'm pretty sure you're going to have at least a couple Kodiaks or at least Grizzlies in there.
Sure. I would field them. If you're doing them with Grizzlies, they would definitely be Rapid Grizzlies or Grizzly Destroyers or things like that. I would almost say you might even be better off putting them with Tigers.
Oh, okay.
Exactly, because you're going to have that kind of tougher GP go along with a little bit more of a Swiss Army knife. Even Hunters with armor jackets or something like that would go really well. Kodiaks go very well with larger gears, obviously, but the Grizzly is a fire support gear, whereas the Kodiak is a assault gear. So you're going to want assault rolls. Whatever goes with assault.
I guess the next unit we're on is the Razorback. It only has 2 loadouts by the looks of it. And it doesn't seem that interesting, but I'll go over it just in case. It has a 6 movement skill, 7 armor. It's a 4/2 with a 4 gunnery skill, 4 piloting, EW of 6. It comes with a medium snub cannon, a pack gun, medium rocket pack, LMG, anti-personnel grenade launcher, and a LSG arm. I don't know what's anything great about it. It kind of just seems a different gear with some different stuff. I don't know what's great about it.
Your close range firepower, dude.
Yep.
Really? Oh, I guess you're right.
Pretty
Snub
much.
cannon. Yeah.
Yep.
Snub cannon and pack gun.
Yeah, it's going to be a very good carry a big punchy weapon into someone's face sort of a gear. Absolutely.
Yep.
And if you want to talk about someone to go with a Kodiak, this is really good.
Here's a good bodyguard for him.
Yep. A good pairing to think of when you're thinking of how to make a good squadron that is good in numerous circumstances is think about long range versus close range. And the Razorback makes an excellent bodyguard. You have a unit that's capable of hitting something far away with a really punchy weapon. Put a Razorback beside him, and that Razorback is going to just.
I never thought of that because
because
you can just have the Razorbacks just hold, right?
Yep.
Or standby, I believe it's called, then just have your Codex do crap, and then if someone gets close, cool, I'm going to react to you. Bye.
That is very much the Northern character of I am not going to race to get into your face. I'm very calm. I'm advancing my battle line. You decide you want to come over here, I'm ready for you. But other than that, I dictate what happens on this table. You don't. I decide when I come to you. You don't. That's their character. The Razorback's interesting because it's the first gear design that was not based on the Hunter. So decided they were going to completely build things from the ground up, and it failed. It's not great. It's more common in the Western frontier because it's kind of a cheaper chassis to get, really. But it's not.
I mean, that makes sense too, because when you have people like trying to storm in and stuff like that, you want that close action.
Yeah, and the Peacemaker Razorback is it's the model that they like. It's inspirational for the Wolf piece. They like it. It's was there a TV show? I think there was a historical character in the 1800s. So sandstorm strikes and things like that.
Yeah.
Against the Southern Republic in the Badlands. There was the captain's name, Captain Reynolds Wild Bill Williams of the 157 Mad Slashers. And he decided to outfit his Razorback instead of with a snub cannon. He had a big old V-hack, which would be a heavy rotary cannon in today's terms.
Damn.
That's what he used.
So, yeah. Awesome. So next we got the bear is to be honest, I like the bear. So it's 9 points.
I love it.
Walker 6, 7 armor, 4/2, and has a 1 action, 4+ gunnery skill, 5 piloting skill, 6 up EW, heavy autocannon, medium rocket pack that's linked, which is great, an LGM, a LMG, and a Viper blade, and that's it. It seems like your basic heavy gear. They have different they have some variants, like it's cool names like Mauler Bear, Den Mother.
Yep, the Den Mother being
the Mad Dog.
The bear is the older version of the grizzly. Like it served for over a century, the bear, as the fire support gear for the North until it was replaced in the 1880s, I think, something like that, 1870s, 1880s. So yeah, it's a very good fire support gear. It provides good amount of that, but it's considered sort of second line. It still sees wide use all across the North. All 3 polar leagues use them. They're good gears. I love them. I have a bunch, and they are a core of my highly mobile artillery for the 74th.
Awesome. Yeah. Next, we got the Lion, which, oh my gosh, I think the Lion looks pretty cool. So it's 10 points. It's basically a bear, but it's different in some ways. So it has 4/2, armor 7, of course, 1 action, 4+ gunnery, 4+ piloting, 6 up EW, heavy autocannon. It comes with a medium artillery rocket, which is awesome. Anti-personnel grenade launcher, and then a heavy close combat weapon, and it has climber, brawler 1, and obviously arms. So yeah, it seems, I think we were talking about this with one of the other gears where you drop in and it just uses its like range on elevation. I feel like the Lion is like that, where you just climb up on a good platform and then just rain rockets on people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The Lion is interesting from a lore perspective because it doesn't really exist. There is a small blurb, I'm trying to find it here, of the Lion being an experimental replacement to the Jaguar, like a super commando. And it's not quite what that was anymore, but it is still pretty cool. I give it a thumbs up still. It's pretty nice.
And I think now we're getting into the,
I love the Lightning Lion.
The Lightning Lion. Yeah.
Just for that lightning It's got the medium particle accelerator. Still has everything else, just adds a medium particle accelerator.
Yep.
To give you that lightning gun.
Just what you needed.
Just what you need. If you want to mess with your opponents, man, haywire them.
Oh, haywire
lightning
so
gun.
good.
Shoot a lightning gun at them and watch them cry. And watch whatever you just hit get shut down.
Ooh, yeah. And also, actually, I just realized this. This is a keynote. So they have two different types of lions, which is interesting. The other lion, which is a bit higher in points, you get a 5-1 stat line, which is awesome. And you get a better piloting skill. Or sorry, not piloting, better gunnery skill. So it's basically the same thing. And that's where the particle weapon is from as well with the lightning. So you pay extra points and you can get a slightly more durable, better shooting lion, which is
both versions of the lion have a lightning lion.
Yep.
Which is hilarious.
Yes,
it's just
awesome.
The 3+1 is going to make people cry.
Yeah.
Oh, I need 3+ to help my margin of successes. Oh, you're haywired. I hit you. Have a nice day.
Yeah, zap. It's
so I'm pretty sure. Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's super mean, and I love it, and I love doing that kind of stuff. It's great.
Yeah, I'm getting a little excited because now we're getting into the kind of Strider territory. I'm pretty sure because I don't know all the models personally. Is the scimitar, is that a Strider? Is that a Gear Strider?
That is the Gear Strider.
Mm-hmm.
That is the big mama.
Awesome. Yeah, so this one's clocking in at 24 points. A walking of 6, 10 armor, 5-3, 2 actions, 4 up gunnery skill, and 5 up piloting skill, and 5 up electronic warfare. Comes with a lot of guns. One of the cool things about it looks like it has Climber and Brawler 1. It comes with a SC. I think SC is what? Oh, that's a snuff cannon, right? Yep. So it's only damage 11, or I don't know what's the damage is for snuff cannons are, but damage 11, AP of 5. That's nuts. A light ATM has the asterisk T, medium autocannon, T anti-air, medium anti-personal grenade launcher, an MSG that is linked, and a heavy vibro blade that's reach 2. Sorry, I stuttered there for a bit, but it has a lot of weapons. So and it has a ton of different loadouts. I don't see it. Personally, for me, looking at all these loadouts, I can't see anything that pops up that's super crazy. Colin, you probably have a better idea of what better to.
It really depends on how you're planning on using it. The scimitar doesn't fit into the lore. It's not mentioned, I should say.
Okay, so it's one of those new Gear Striders.
It is new. The only one that isn't new is the Cataphract. And the Cataphract has a fairly kind of narrow place in the lore as well. But the scimitar, if I were to be fielding that, which the model's amazing, I really love it, I would almost use it like a super hunter. Put on that gigantic snub cannon, give it some, again, maybe field some tigers with it. Tigers would be fun. And just walk it up the middle. You dictate what happens in this battle. And you just make a no-go zone around that scimitar. And just walk it to where you want to be. And yeah, your enemy is going to do everything they can to try and kill it. Have fun with that. Yeah. So that's probably what I would do with it, is I would probably stick with the classic snub cannon, because the snub cannon is a very northern weapon. And the snub cannon was basically developed or came into its own in the War of the Alliance as salvaged naval cannons. Like all the land ships had gotten blown up and that sort of, horrible stuff had happened. So they just took these smoothbore cannons, converted them so the gears could fire them, and used that for killing hover tanks. And it worked. You have to get super close, but it worked. And that kind of formed the Northern doctrine.
Yeah, to me, it just seems like a giant beat stick.
Especially since it's got that big, heavy vibro blade of Reach 2 and Brawler 1. Like, it's going to pound somebody into submission.
Exactly. So it's going to say, you don't want to be near me. Stay away. It gives you area.
The fact that it has climb. So, and I think that's very unique. I'm trying to think of another gear, because I don't think the Peace River, the new Cole, has climb.
No.
Maybe they do. But yeah, that's a cool trait with the North Gear Striders that has climb.
Also, fun fact is, so the T that we briefly mentioned is turret.
Yes.
So like the medium autocannon and the light anti-tank missiles are all on a turret. So if somebody tries to sneak something in fast behind it, that's not going to work at all.
Yeah, you
You
still
can
have
just
a weapon.
rotate you can just rotate that turret behind you and go bye-bye.
Yep. Yeah,
Sure.
and it even has an anti-air gun as well, which is always good. It depending on what you're fighting against. Now and I think we'll see down the list if there's enough. Is there another Gear Strider besides this? Now because we're going into the Mammoth, which is a regular Strider.
Not in the North. That's it.
Okay, so that's it for the North. Okay,
yeah.
So the Mammoth is our regular Strider.
Humongous.
Yeah, so everyone thinks that the model is crouching. It is not. If you actually look at the lore, and there's even a schematic of it that shows how it actually moves. It's really interesting how it moves. It's a very unique design, but it's still cool looking. So it's 20. Yeah, so it's 26 points, movement of 5, 11 armor. It's a 6-2, 2 actions, 4 up gunnery skill. Piloting is a 6 up. It's awful. Electronics warfare of a 5+. Comes with an HSC, another snub cannon. Yep, it has precise on it, which is pretty cool. Medium ATM on the arm. Medium RC, which is auto. I forgot what the auto rule does. 2 times MMG, which is another auto. MCW arm. Has React Plus, which is great. Lumbering, and then has a target designator for the base loadout, but the other ones, most of the other ones do not. Yeah, Colin, you probably know a lot about the Mammoth, and I assume you probably own one.
I love it. Yeah, I've got a few. Yeah. The thing with the Mammoth is it is a little tough to use because it's not very quick, but it really exemplifies, like we've been talking before about area control, how the North is very much about denying zones of control. And that's the Mammoth is a perfect example of that, because no one wants to be within snub cannon range of a Mammoth.
Because that thing will just chew you up.
Yeah, they tend to be slow. They tend to be braced. They just tend to sit there, and they're going to get to you. They'll take a while, but they'll get to you. But it also has those missiles, so it is able to provide long-range attacks while also doing that area denial. The scariest thing that I've seen in the field is an Aller Mammoth combo. Those two things together, because that Aller is going to just pop anything on the table, but you got a Mammoth beside it with that snub cannon that is going to say, if you want to come assault this tank, you're going to have a problem. So it is the Mammoth is very good at saying, this place is mine.
Yeah, it's a cool design for a Strider. It's very unique. Like, I've not seen any Strider that relates to that.
Yeah, it's a very cool Apache helicopter with legs and piles of armor. Very tough. It used to be that it didn't have the treads on its feet, and because now it can just roll around, whereas before it had to walk everywhere and it was really slow. Which I kind of missed that. I missed that, the fact that you had to deal with the fact that wherever it was, it's not getting anywhere else fast. But it still has that character of being very slow, very plodding, very methodical, which really portrays that northern character of being very calculated and calm.
Yeah, awesome. So now we're on to, I don't know how good the Lynx is. The Lynx is pretty good. It's really cheap. It's only 4 points.
It's fun.
Walk around 8, 4 armor, 3/3 for piloting and gunnery, 6 EW. Comes with an MIS arm, and it has burst 1, a light hand grenade, LCW, and comes with arms and agile. And then it has one other profile, which is 1 point more, and I believe it comes with, I think it's 1 extra armor. So yeah,
it's obviously got the armor. It's just a goofy little. I love it. They're funny. I think they're fun.
So now it's kind of interesting that they put that there. So now we're on to the Thunder Hammer. I believe, is this a tank? What is it? Is it another Strider?
That is a Strider.
Okay. So it's 30 points. Walker 6, 11 armor. It's a 4/4, 2 actions, 4 gunnery skill, 6 up piloting, a 5 up EW. Comes with the turret, the heavy AG. It comes with another FT plus F. I remember that's a Ford turret, right?
Yep.
Fast turret.
Fast turret. Yes, that is a medium RC. It comes with a medium rocket pack that is also a fast turret, a heavy anti-personal grenade launcher, and a medium close combat weapon. It's lumbering and it's stable. Stable is great because it gives you that +1 die if you're not standing still. So it always gives you a +1 die to your attacks. But yeah, that's the base stats. Colin, what do you think of the Thunderhammer?
The Thunderhammer is, again, the rough terrain large artillery piece instead of like the Verter being its general artillery piece. This is the rough terrain because it's got those legs to get into strange positions and things like that. It has a 120 millimeter smoothbore gun. That's its main gun. It is a big old chonker. You don't see very many of them out in the field, but it provides excellent fire support. Yeah, it's a good vehicle. If you want to have an artillery piece on the board, it's not a bad one. If you're going to put it on the board, protect it. It's not going to be super good at protecting itself. It'll be okay, but not amazing. And yeah, I like them. They're cool.
Yeah, you would think the artillery gun would be like it would at least have climb or something. I don't know what lumbering does as far as rules, so that makes it like any. I don't think it actually helps with climbing, but maybe I'm used to the Red Bull from Peace River where it has that aspect of being like this strider that gets into those weird, crappy places with an artillery piece. But the Thunderhammer just seems like a regular strider with a artillery gun.
Basically, is I can't remember. Lumbering means you can't fire while you're moving. Is that right? I remember.
Oh yeah, I need to look at. Yeah, it's been a while since it's been a while since I looked at the rules. We'll figure that out later. Yeah, but anyways, yeah, and then after that, we're starting to get into more of these smaller unit. Yeah, like more armored stuff. Like you have the Clem, which is only just one stat line, right? It's a ground of 6, armor 10, 4/4, 2 actions. Medium ATM, which is a turret and ox. Medium autocannon, fast turret, an MMG, and a medium anti-personal grenade launcher. It's off-road 4 and smoke. And I assume this is where you get most of the tanks, right? Because of the Clem, the Bandit Hunter, the Tiber, the Jackson, the Stormhammer. Are these basically?
They're all Clems.
Oh, okay.
They're just Clems with different weapon profiles, but it's the same chassis.
Yeah, yeah, and we're starting to get into the more single off unit vehicles. Colin, I like how as far as like the other stuff. I guess we could talk about the main flyers, right? Not to like skip a lot of stuff. I think we can overglaze some of the stuff like the squads, because a lot of the squads are basically the same across the board. Is like what?
Some details on those things.
Yeah,
there's a little bit
exactly.
The North tends to field armor in squads of 3, so you'll see 3 tanks per squad. They tend to stick light tanks with light tanks, heavy tanks with heavy tanks. The armor doctrine they treat armor mostly like assault units. They don't tend to. It depends on the actual vehicle's role, obviously. You're not going to take a Jackson and go ram it into a wall or something like that. But I personally field an Aller company. I've got a bunch of Allers, and I field them with Badgers full of infantry, mortars and grenade launchers and stuff like that. And they terrify people when I put them on the table. Especially in the current game, there is very little that upsets an Aller, except for a Visigoth. They have excellent duels. Allers and Visigoths are just mean to each other, and they're pretty equivalent. Aller's got a bit more range. Visigoth's a little bit more versatile. But yeah, if you put heavy tanks on the table, you will scare people, and the Aller is the king main battle tank. The king.
Yeah, it seems pretty nasty because it moves slow, like really slow, but armor 12, 5/3, 3 actions. Yeah, it's your basic like beat stick of a tank.
It doesn't really need to go anywhere fast because it can hit everything on the table, so it doesn't really care. The Verter is goofy. Same with the Hardy Aller. They're both just silly, very big guns. excellent artillery pieces. When it comes to the aircraft, obviously the aircraft are not portrayed to a huge amount.
Yeah, because we can touch on them a bit more. So we have the Dragonfly VTOL, which has North specific. So I don't know if the Dragonfly is in other armies. Cheap, yeah, it's 13 points. It's a hover 12, armor 6, 4/4, 2 actions, piloting of 3 up, gunnery skill 4 up, electronics warfare for 6 up, medium autocannon, fast turret, plus F, anti-air, light ATM, which is aux, and then a light AAM, which is an aux as well. And it's agile, target designator, VTOL. It's actually a pretty cheap VTOL to buy. And then you have the Scorpion, which is the more expensive version.
Yes.
And that one's 22 points. It moves a bit slower. It has armor 9. Same stat line. It has worse piloting skill of with a 4 up. It has a medium autocannon, fast turret, F, anti-air. It has 2 times 2 medium ATMs, and then a medium AR, which is linked. That's super good, actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, agile, target designator, and VTOL. Do you see like the Scorpion and Dragonfly like in armies? Like, are they just more of a cool thing to bring on, or?
You definitely see them. I've got a friend who loves fielding VTOLs and aircraft, and the Scorpion is terrifying. The Dragonfly is technically a civilian VTOL. It's a civilian.
Oh, okay.
So it's used militarily, but it tends to be like just recon and light support duties. And so you'll see that in garrisons and auxiliaries and stuff like that, because it is quite good at that. It's very good for doing quick recon. And on the tabletop, great harasser, excellent harassment vehicle. But you do need to make sure that if you're taking that one, you need to plan a big table. You need lots of room so that you can use that speed and that maneuverability to your advantage. Otherwise, it's just going to explode like a hot herb pop.
Yeah, because everyone's going to just pick it out.
Yeah, because it's an easy kill. It carries a pretty decent weapon for a harasser. So yeah, you want to be careful with it. Whereas the Scorpion is very much more your Apache attack helicopter. It's pretty good armor for what it has. It has a withering amount of firepower, and it can get that firepower into very uncomfortable places very quickly.
Yeah, 2 times anti-tank missiles. That's nuts.
It's disgusting. They are horrible. But again, you need space. If you play on tight tables, I would probably say your points are better spent elsewhere, because it's still fragile. It's still an air unit. And if your enemy has any anti-air, that is going to tear apart your precious VTOL, and all those points will go away.
Yeah, because if you look at the terrain size of generally what you bring into a table, like, yes, it covers most of the basic gears. But once you start bringing like the gear striders, and like VTOLs, basically you'll be able to see a lot of the board. And because of that, most of the people can see you.
It really depends on the scenery you play with. I tend to play with a lot of verticality. There's a lot of, my forests are like 10 inches tall. I have tall forests, buildings and rocks and stuff like that. So I can get away with putting a VTOL on the table and having place for it to hide. Whereas if you don't play with that, they can be a tricky proposition.
Yeah. And towards the bottom of the roster, if you have anything to say about the infantry, we can discuss it. It's basically what you see in all the other factions. I don't see anything that's super unique to the North as far as their infantry is concerned. I wish they did have something like guys riding on giant saber-tooth cats.
There's not really actually very many mammals on Terra Nova. Terra Nova doesn't really have mammals. They have wolves. There are wolves up in the north. Dire wolves, actually. They're much larger than Earth wolves. But yeah, they don't really have anything like that. What you'll see, I'll say 2 things about infantry. First thing is the North tends to go with a little bit heavier armor, just from a lore perspective. They tend to wear what they call in the lore turtle shell armor, which is chunkier. And the second thing I will say is that most Terra Nova armies, and Norgard is no exception, have about 50% of their force in infantry. Infantry is still the most common regiment. It's the most common unit that you'll see. They are the ones that actually take and hold ground and get the job done. About from that last 50%, 30% tends to be gears, and the last 20% is split between armor, aircraft, and the other specialists. Most of what you see on the table or in the actual rosters of the military is going to be infantry. So if you want to make something that is true to lore, having infantry on the table is probably a good idea because they're cheap. They're cheap. Put them on the table. They do stuff. They provide a little bit of bulk for fire, and they do take territory quite well. So they won't hurt you.
Yeah. And I mean, and to be honest, infantry are good. And what's nice about North is that if you want to just go heavy infantry and more vehicle heavy without really any gears, that's totally possible. When you look at the points cost of the, we were just talking about that tank, that big tank you were just talking about. Yeah, the Aller. Yeah, that thing's like 37 points. You get like 2 of those, 3 of those, and then just a bunch of infantry, right? Like you can fill up a list pretty quickly, and
that is legitimately my army right there.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of badgers with infantry, and that's my army, and it does work. It works really well. So yeah,
totally. And even though we like covered mostly gears in the segment, that's what Heavy Gear Blitz is, right? It's based around these gears. Yep. That doesn't stop you from making. It's not saying that making an all infantry list with tanks and VTOLs or whatever, that's not a bad idea. In fact, that's a good idea. That's just as good as bringing gears. It's just a different play style. And North can do that. And I think they have great ways of doing it. And Absolutely. You don't have to switch factions. Right? You don't have to switch to CEF to do that. You can still do that within North.
You can do that just as well, just as easily. And one of the nice things about North and South, they are capable of playing any play style. They can do all of them quite easily. They have all of the tools at their disposal. So yeah, for sure.
And yeah, it's interesting because with what you said like earlier in the days that like they would have a bunch of infantry with 1 hunter. The rules can actually support that just with how squads work and the 4 actions. You can still have 3 infantry, like a decent amount of infantry, and just have 1 gear with them.
Yeah, just supported by a gear, absolutely. And that's very much in character with an early Terra-Novan army.
Yeah. And the only last thing I will mention on this roster, we don't have to go deep into it. I'm not even going to read the stats. They just have some of the basic stuff like a hunter, a jaguar, but it's a military police. And really the only thing they get bonus is a shield and a brawler one with it. So
MPs don't play too big into northern stuff because they don't tend to hit the field, unlike the South, where the South uses MPs to ensure that penal legions and like the ESCs, slave legions, and things like that.
And I assume they just give you that option for modeling perspective. If you want to build a police type of force for North, you can totally go about it. I think the South would be better for that, but you can still do it.
The North can do it, and the North you can have a lot of fun with that. Like, it's a good way to explain if you have someone else you're playing with who's also playing North. They're lawbreakers. They're breaking the law or calling the cops on you. You take out your MPs, and there you go. There's your game.
Yeah. Awesome. Before we end I think at this point we've covered everything for the North.
I can keep going if you want.
Yeah, I know it's crazy, and we're in later episodes. We're definitely going to get deeper into stuff. We could have a whole episode just on the Northern Lights lore. I think for now we can probably save the sub list for those probably videos, so that way we can still have a tactical viewpoint in addition to the lore. I think that's the best way. And and the sub lists are great. The only thing I will say about them is just from looking over them, they tend to lend towards giving you a lot more diversity in your squads. So instead of being very specific, they're like, you can have unlimited hunters or you can have jaguars and this type of unit. They tend to play a lot of that in the sub list, I noticed. But and as far as getting into the North, Colin, what's your best advice? It seems pretty obvious with starting with the plastic starter, but if you have any like other advice for that, like how would you go about starting North?
If you're wanting to just get a little bit of everything, the plastic starters are excellent. They're great. And that's also good if you aren't quite sure what you want to play. Both the North and the South allow you to do a lot. So starting just with one of the two polar leagues, or polar factions, I should say, will let you play around with a lot of different game styles and play styles and that kind of thing to find out what you like. At that point, you'll have a better idea. Starting with plastics will help with that a lot. Other than that, hunters are great, and they will form the foundation for anything else that you want to build. You will always need hunters. You'll always find a place for them. Get a bunch of hunters. Go from there.
Is there any, you mentioned like the Kodiak, I don't know what's actually you can build from the starter set, but is there anything like besides the box that you would probably recommend purchasing that is a good buy-in for the faction that you almost like always want?
Again, it really depends on the style of gameplay that you want. I would personally say that if you want to play something close to the Northern character, but you want to be a little bit chunkier about it, go get some Tigers. Tigers are great. They play the Northern style very well. And so a unit, 4 Tigers, 1 Sabertooth is a great core for the army. After which point, you'll probably want some bears because bears are cool. You'll probably want to get some more Kodiaks because they're great. There's lots of directions to go, but it really depends on the sort of army that you want to play.
Yeah. Gene, you got any advice for new players as far as like North is concerned?
Buy the plastic starter. Have fun.
Buy as many as you want. Buy 12.
Buy a few. If you really want to go crazy, like Colin.
Yep, absolutely. Buy 4.
Because that'll give you all the options.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I know this was a longer episode than I actually thought this was longer than I thought it was going to go. Colin, did you want to give any shout outs to anyone that,
I want to give a shout out to all of my gaming crew over here, and also to Robert for making a cool game.
Yes. Yeah. And if you want to go ahead and pick up the starter set and stuff, you can pick it up on DP9's online store for the North. So actually all their stuff is on the online store, so you don't have to worry about the Kickstarter site. So that's a big bonus.
Good.
Yeah. Awesome. Tune in for next episode. We're going to be talking about the South. We'll probably release this long episode as 1 or maybe 2, depending on how we want to do it. But yeah, thanks for listening, and remember to play and build your community.
Thanks for listening, and 100%. Viva la South.
I'll let you leave with that Viva la South. We'll have a discussion on that on a tabletop at some point.